Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Rev Left Radio. On today's episode, we have back on the show my close personal friend and repeat guest, mostly on the Patreon, I think, but a couple episodes publicly, David Icenogle from the YouTube channel No Chaser. He's been on, I think the last public episode you were on was in regards to alcoholism and recovery surrounding addiction, which a lot of people resonated with. And then now I'm having you back on to kind of have a broader discussion of mental health and mental health issues. Some of which dovetail, obviously, with your experiences of addiction, but just in and of themselves are an issue that you've struggled with, that I've struggled with, that people out there listening have almost certainly struggled with, or know people right now in their lives who are struggling with some form of mental illness. So, of course, when we're talking about an issue like this, I just want to launch a little preface by saying neither David or I are medical experts. We're going to be talking about our own experiences. We're going to be examining those experiences with the goal of hopefully letting people out there who are struggling with this stuff know that they're not alone, first and foremost, and hopefully saying things that will resonate with people who have or are currently going through it. But as always, if you have a specific mental health issue, definitely talk to medical professionals and get help on your specific problem, and don't take anything that we're saying here tonight as medical advice for you, because we are not medical experts and we're not doing that. Our goal here is just to talk about our shared experiences, make people feel less alone, and just kind of wrestle with the complexity of mental health in the American context in particular, and what those processes of going through mental illness and trying to get help for mental illness often look like. And, just to restate it, mental health issues are often very isolating. They're very alienating. Often you feel incredibly alone. And so if nothing else, an episode like this is meant to kind of extend a hand outward and let you know that you are absolutely not alone. And in fact, so many people kind of hide their mental health struggles for various reasons from the people around them, which even add to that. So hopefully we can at least kind of break down those walls a little bit and let people know who are struggling with this stuff that they are not alone, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. So with all of that out of the way, David, would you like to kind of just introduce yourself for people who might not have heard previous episodes with you, and kind of just tell people who you are?
Yeah, I'm David Icenogle, and as far as like my background that's kind of pertinent to the topic at hand, I have family members that deal with mental health and mental illness, not only as their own personal experience, but as professionals. I myself have some professional experience with it. I was a case manager for the Community Alliance, which is part of our community that helps people in a transitionary period, adjusting to life, that have, moderate to severe mental illness. I've written for mental health related publications such as Asylum Magazine, Tethered to This World, some way back in the day, personal, smaller editorials for NAMI. And, I would say, as what you discussed, most importantly, as a criteria of some sort of background, I have lived the experience and still live it. And, and one thing I'd like to say, too, is you talk about the common but very true phrase that, you are not alone on this. I kind of hope what to accomplish with this conversation is, of course, you're not alone in the feelings you have, the deficiencies of mind that create moods or create, cognitive problems. Of course, you're not alone in that. But I really want to stress that you're also not alone in the experience of trying to get help, because that's a shared experience in itself. I mean, I'm not just talking about dealing with the issues and affliction of an impaired mind of that sort, but I'm talking about things like seeking help, having to deal with the world of counseling, prescription drugs, having to deal with how you adjust to society, having to deal with even modern stuff that, occurs today that has like vastly changed the landscape of mental health, and just finding the search for the remedy of it, rather. That's an experience of it too, and I want people to know that, even if it's smaller gripes or bigger things, as far as like finances or stigma, you're not alone in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe another thing to say before we get into your story, as kind of a way to get into this broad ecosystem of issues through a narrative thrust of a personal experience. Before we get into that, maybe we should talk about different kinds of mental illness, and maybe if there's a specific kind that we'll be focusing on today, because I know I've dealt with things like depression and obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety, but have not dealt with things like schizophrenia, for example. So when we talk about mental illness, it's a wide range of things with varying degrees of intensity and, disabling aspects to it. So did you kind of just want to talk about maybe different categories of mental illness and what we might be focusing on more today?
Right. I mean, I think, of course there's always gray area, but I think you can really put it into two hemispheres. There's sort of what is called as the mood affecting, disorders, and then the cognitive affecting disorders. So like the mood affecting one is what you consider as depression, bipolar, anxiety. And then, thankfully, there's been some progress as destigmatizing those. I also think it has something to do with the relativity of it, as in other people kind of know what depression is like. And one quick aside is that, a big problem is that, and I don't think it's always malicious or mean-spirited or even just like a forced ignorance. I think some people with, mental health problems get really frustrated because people are like, I know how you feel. Because it is a relative thing. People know what it's like to be sad. Even in terms of like addiction, like, I'm addicted to the cookies or something, and I know what that's like. Anxiety, I know what that's like, so people can kind of in their, mind be like, I kind of understand what they have. People say, I'm feeling so depressed today, or, I'm totally just anxiety. No one's saying I feel schizophrenic today.
Right.
And that's where you see the break off of that other hemisphere where what you're talking about is cognitive, where it's not, obviously affects the mood, but you're talking, in the mood ones, you're talking about the kind of the internal problems of dealing with yourself. The cognitive one is dealing with the world because, you talk about dissociative disorders, identity disorders, and it's more kind of a battle with reality. And that, like, as far as my background of working with people, that is mostly who I worked with as far as like, adjusting and being their case manager. It was people mostly with those more severe cognitive ones. Now, however, there are some people that had mood ones of depression that was so debilitating they'd go catatonic. I think one good way to kind of illustrate it is that one that you could maybe see as an in-between is obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, obsessive compulsive disorder really at its heart is an anxiety problem. And so there's the mood part of it, of anxiety that is being generated within you, but there's the cognitive aspect of how you deal with that or how you function because of it. It manifests in kind of cognitive ways where, it comes in with the rituals, the counting, the kind of the behaviors of your mind where it's, instead of just coming out in kind of the quote unquote typical ways, that kind of goes over into, I start to believe this reality in a way that I have to do these things. Right. And I think that's where it really, you see if you, like I said, it's a lot of it's relative, but you'd see kind of a division a little bit between the two of what the experience is, or especially how they are approached in terms of help.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, especially with the mood side of that spectrum, and the point that you made that people can at least relate to those issues a little bit more because, like you said, everybody's been nervous, everybody's been anxious, everybody's been down in the dumps, depressed, even if they haven't had clinical anxiety or depression. There's a kernel of the human condition that everybody experiences where they can be like, okay, I can understand like having a bad day that doesn't end, or I can understand that feeling I get before I speak in front of crowds, but happening for no reason throughout the day. Whereas, more advanced ones or on the other side of the cognitive spectrum might be a little more difficult for people to relate to. And a lot of stereotypes can crop up specifically around those, even when we're making advancements in society as far as awareness and acceptance of certain disorders. There's still plenty of stereotypes, particularly on that end of things, the cognitive end of things that people have harder times relating to, that do persist. So those are all, interesting things to put on the table before we get into this. And before we move into your experience, because I've talked, about anxiety and depression on this show many times, but I don't really think I've talked about like obsessive compulsive disorder, which weirdly I had more as a kid. So I had, some weird things happen in my childhood, nothing insane, but a step parent for a while that, really believed in corporeal punishment, was incredibly strict. That kind of gave rise to like a stutter that I had for a while. That was basically an anxiety issue of like a sensitive child being overly punished and overly controlled in an authoritarian way, such that I feel like that stutter was a product of the precarity and uncertainty that came with living in that context. And when I left that context, the stutter disappeared. That's as a very young kid. But my entire childhood, I had obsessive compulsive feelings like around germophobia, where I would, like, 7th, 8th grade, I would be washing my hands so much that they would be bleeding. Anytime I touched like a grocery cart in a grocery store, for example, I would feel like my hands were full of like bacteria and disease. I wouldn't let anybody come into my room unless they stripped down from the clothes they wore to school or to work or out in public. You have to get dressed in your pajamas before you're allowed to walk in to my room. The thing when I'd walk home from school every day, I would have this thing where I'd spit on one side of my body, and I'd have to spit in the middle of my walk and on the left side of my body to balance it out, or else I felt off. And I also remember, like, as a little kid, like 13, 14 years old, as I'm going to sleep, the TV channel, the thing I turned the TV off on had to be something that wasn't disturbing or upsetting in any way. So there'd be like 10, 20, 30 minutes every night I'd spend just trying to find a thing that I could turn the TV off on that would be the least disturbing to me, if that makes sense.
No, yeah.
So little things like that. Now, and nobody in my life talked about obsessive, compulsive. They just thought it was a quirk of my personality. Nobody talked about anxiety or anything like that. I certainly didn't get any help for this stuff, and kind of grew out of that form of OCD into like generalized anxiety in my 20s. But I just never really talked about that. And so, the struggles with OCD and their relation to anxiety, I think, is absolutely true.
Well, and I think that's what kind of separates our ideas about them, because a lot of it's just, like, I still classify that as an anxiety sort of disorder. What makes it kind of different in a way is the manifestations of it. So if you talk about, like, depression or anxiety, how people handle it, kind of like isolating or more sometimes binge behaviors or addictive behaviors, sometimes like acting out, taking risky, those are kind of more, I don't know how you'd call it, like, palatable. I wouldn't say socially like acceptable, because
Sure.
like, counting your keychain 40 times is not as bad as like, physically abusing someone.
Right.
But all like the real difference is it's the same root problem. It's just how it manifests. And so, and you bring up an interesting point about how it was like a part of your life. It was manifesting differently in a part of your life. And I remember there was somebody I worked with who it was severe OCD just because of what was needed. And when I say what was needed is that they would, like, one particular thing is that they would be looking at their alarm clock if they woke up, and it'd be like, 3:03 in the morning. They had to watch it and not look away from it. They had to watch it count to 3:30 or to double zeros. I remember I had something like
numerical symmetry.
I remember I had something like that where I had this fear that my clock wasn't working, so I was like, I have to watch it tick before I can go back to sleep for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But the manifestations are more needed, because he would even discuss, like, I know this seems crazy, and it is, but I have to do it. And here's the thing, it calms me. And that's that manifestation where this is what calms me, and for whatever reason, my brain is telling me another way of doing it. And I would say kind of one of those, like, in-between sort of things, as you talk about a lot, is like body dysmorphia. And that's also, I think, a little bit relative to yours in the sense of, like, that sometimes comes on a lot in people's lives for, like, a period. And then, circumstances can change, and they still kind of have the root cause. Now, dysmorphia can be brought on by anxiety or like, depression. And, I think when you talk about rituals of OCD or the, like, dysmorphia, those rituals are, like, little, like, very tangible, even meaningless, physical things that you have some sort of control over. And that's, like, one big thing where if you read a lot about, like, people that have, like, anorexia, they're like, no, I don't actually, and this is not obviously for everybody. You give the preface, and I'll give the same one. This is not any sort of actual psychological, like, diagnosing advice or anything, just experiences of people. But a lot of people are like, I'm not stupid. I know I'm very skinny, but I control this in a way. And even if it's, like, very off-putting to people, and my appearance is not about looking aesthetically well. This has become a physical thing I can grasp that's easy. The same thing as counting things. They're so simple that the big scariness of your anxiety can be kind of washed away in doing these physical things that you have acute control over.
Yes.
And so...
And that makes great sense in the context of my childhood struggles with it, because it was, I believe in retrospect, precisely me attempting to get some control over an unstable home life. There's custody battles. My dad got married and divorced 5 times, so I had a whole array of step families at times, like step siblings that I knew for a year and then never saw again. And then my dad, at age 9, he attempted suicide and chose, of all people, to call his 9-year-old son to tell him that I'm the man of the family now, right? So I'm in this context of, like, generalized instability and precarity, and as a little sensitive child, trying to gain and this was obviously not conscious at the time, but yeah, these are ways that I could ground myself and feel like I have some control in a broader context in which I had none. So that control part really makes a lot of sense with regards to my OCD. And when I grew up out of that context into my teens, started getting more freedom and more ability to control my own life and what I do, it went away, So
Right, and or it can change, and all that type of stuff comes from just on a broader sense of whatever weird preferences, or maybe not weird, but specific, and just you don't even know why. It's the same reason why people have specific phobias or specific sort of like aphilias, or like things that are like weirdly attractive to them, or things that weirdly bring them comfort. Things that like you probably see it all over the internet, like just these things. Like anybody ever like slap the sod, like a Lowe's. It's like you see a bag of sod and you have to slap it for some reason, or you see a bowl of rice and you have to put your hands in it, like a a dry thing, or just. My favorite was when I was walking the hallways of school, there'd be like, the concrete bricks and the lines between them, and my finger had to trace the line inside of it. I had to go the whole hall. There's just little things like that. But when you're talking to where it becomes debilitating is obviously where it's like affecting your life, or you can consider it as this is an unhealthy way of coping because it's not addressing the problem. And, it just based on our own like unique minds of what thing brings us a sort of either comfort or remedy for the anxiety. And for some people, it's more, I guess you would call like agreeable in the sense of like, I understand that. It could be drugs and alcohol, which is a huge part of it. Or, it could be codependency or things like that. But then in some aspects, especially if it's very, like, you talk about your experience and these were in different places when you were moving, and it can change in that. There's a different environment brings on a different thing of just doing this tangible thing. Obviously, all unconscious, especially at that age. Yeah. But just the doing of the thing, even if you have that monologue in your head going like, why am I doing this goofy stuff? It's just like, I don't care. Just as that guy had told me, he goes, I know this is crazy, but it brings something. I won't even say serenity. It's not that strong, but it brings something to watch the clock hit 30. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess we can begin by getting into your general story, and that will be the sort of vector through which we explore many other issues related to mental health in general. So you can and particularly the onset of any mental illnesses that you suffered and when that happened. So if you can kind of just walk us through your story, take as long as you want, because we're going to be touching on these topics on this outline throughout.
Yeah, so I think one thing I did want to bring up, and this is funny. We talk about kind of the two realms of like how relative it is to people to be able to speak about like mental illness or mental health issues. Is that I have this issue that was incredibly hard to talk to people about, and it's what's classified as maladaptive daydreaming. And it's not recognized as its own disorder by the DSM, but I remember, and I had it through all my adulthood, where I would create stories in my head of daydreaming, but, and people would all say, like, if you do stuff like that, well, you do writing, it's probably part of the creative process. I go, no, I never had any intention of ever doing anything with these stories. And I'm not even talking when I was little, like imaginary friends. It went throughout the years as I was growing up, and part of some of the people would see I would have unconscious facial kind of movement because of how hard I was daydreaming. Now, my dad and my brother and my dad's brother have severe ADHD. I don't have the H part, but I know it can be tied to that. But it wasn't even just doing stuff when I was bored. And you talk about things that manifest. This is the reason I bring it up. I use that. I remember I had some difficult parts early in my childhood with a relationship with a certain person, and I would kind of zone out. Sometimes I would do it on my own, but I would zone out and then go into the story, especially if I was feeling some sort of like internal discomfort. And a lot of people who've suffered childhood trauma also seem to have this thing that's maladaptive daydreaming. The reason I just started out with that because I remember that I would talk to people about my depression, like earlier on, because as I'll get into, like it came on early. And I would be okay with that. There would still be some shame of why do I feel this way? Why can't I enjoy life? All that type of stuff. But again, you get into that where it's cognitive. I felt like such a weirdo for this little world I had to myself. And I didn't first tell anybody until I was 22.
But you were doing it all through your childhood.
No, I was doing it all through my teenage and adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, just to give a level of like how weird it was and how embarrassed I was. I would, when I started playing like football or watching football, I would create a different league in my head of the same type of stuff, and I actually had these notebooks of stats I'd keep that are completely made up. And I don't know why, right? Yeah. And I held these notebooks of this stuff, and I was like, one day I'm going to need to show somebody this. And I just kept them. And then
you just made up an entire league with an entire set of teams, an entire set of players with fake stats and everything.
And I knew it wasn't real. And a lot of this stuff, I can't stress enough. This is not part of the creative process. I don't plan to do anything with this. And I would do it a lot when I was trying to go to sleep. I'd focus really hard on it when I was like quiet by myself. And people noticed when I was little, I was able to spend a lot of time on my own. There was actually some worries at that point about like my development because of the amount of time that I would spend alone. And that is, I just want to get to anybody, just on this outset of like, that there is something that when it comes to those cognitive things, when it feels really like reality problems or like I am very weird, or even I talk about the manifestation, some things you might do to remedy the anxiety might be even really weirder. People are truly not alone in that. Yeah. And I felt such a sense of relief when I finally talked about it. I mean, I would not say it was nearly as debilitating as depression, but it was there. That was one thing I just wanted to get on. But as far as like what would become the major factor in my life, it really started as something where I can't like solidify this word enough, abnormal. I was feeling sad when I was younger, but the sadness that I had was abnormal because I was probably about in third grade, and it wasn't that I was sad about, again, this is one of the key things about depression. It wasn't that I was sad about things. Something happened. I invited whoever to the dance and it didn't come through, or I got cut from the basketball team, or just, I didn't get what I wanted for Christmas, some younger age. It came out of like nothing, and it came out of these like really negative thoughts I have. And then even as I was like in fifth grade, I started to have like physical depression problems. Like even as a sprite young boy, I would just want to like sleep, and I'd want to sleep away this sort of discomfort. And I remember this so, and I've done it throughout my life a lot. I remember just walking down a hallway full of like kids throughout school and just thinking to myself, like, I'm not like any of these people. I'm not just really sad a lot. Like I have these weird, like dark thoughts, and these thoughts kind of like spiral. And, I think, and one thing where it really started to hit me, I think I've really only had what you would classify as one panic attack in my entire life. I remember it was when I was in sixth grade and I was in bed, and I really grasped the concept of dying. And I've talked to a lot of people, and people have a lot of those moments like that where they truly, and again, not think about, but grasp that God might not be real, or even things of like when you find out that your parents are flawed, or like things like that. And I remember I had that, and I was depressed before that, but these negative thoughts started to become very intrusive kind of after that moment. It could have just been part of my development because I'm heading into puberty, like, pretty close at that point. But again, there was just this abnormalness where I was like, I know people. I'm a being in this world. I know other people get sad and stuff, but mine feels weird. And why?
Can you give us some examples of what you mean by dark thoughts?
Yeah, so when
intrusive thoughts?
Intrusive, so it would just be these sort of negative thoughts where I would, apropos of nothing, I would just be like, what if everybody thinks I'm really stupid? It would be based off nothing. It would start a lot with self-esteem, but then I would think about things like dying in like just a car accident from school. I used to think of these things like, honestly, like maybe if I think we might get in an accident, it won't happen. Because what's the chances of getting into an accident if you're thinking about it?
Right.
And they would be morbid. But a lot of times when I say negative, they're just these like sort of distortions like that. Honestly, and again, what was abnormal is like how young I was like, the world's meaningless. Like this stuff is stupid. Even when I couldn't grasp concepts of nihilism or things like that, just that general sense of like, younger kids running around, and they might deal with like heavier things, kind of like you had in your life, but they don't even know how to address it. But like, yeah, I like playing kickball or something like that. Like just kind of this innocence. It was just this dark space where I remember I talked to some people. I let a little peep out of it, and people would back away like, why do you think about stuff like that? I'm like, oh, never mind. Never talking again.
And you weren't able, there's not just a weird thought here and there, but you weren't able to shake them. They became obsessive in your mind, or you became fixated on these dark thoughts?
I mean, in a sense where I wouldn't say it was like plaguing or they were relentless, but they would affect my mood, and they would start to overcome. It would start to overcome me, and then all of a sudden, I may not be thinking about it, but I'm in like a depressed mood, and all of a sudden, some sleepover I was excited for, I wasn't excited for anymore. And again, I think the thing that was most alarming to me is the physical, as where it's like, you imagine when people have that kind of thing of depression, and they do like the little reel of it, like that you see on like commercials for prescriptions. It's like, usually some like 40-year-old person in bed trying, they have bags under their eyes and stuff like that. And a lot of it deals with energy, which is a big part of it. But I had that when I was like young, where I was just like, I don't want to go to school, or I don't want to do this, or I have like, this later, or history class is boring or anything like that. I was like, I don't want to get up. And even if like these might be a little bit more sophisticated, like way I'm describing them, I mean, I think they were whatever like sort of context I was able, or mental vernacular I had to describe it, but it was the sentiment was there. It's like, this is stupid. I would go through like just not caring about life, like life in general. And it was and I know that one thing, just as a quick aside, is that that maladaptive daydreaming also it would work in tandem sometimes with the depression, where even the stories I had would become depressing ones. And, it was just so kind of like when I was going through that quite a bit, and there would be moments where I'd feel like I'd break from it. I'm like, oh, I'm a normal boy or something. And then it would kind of come back, and then, it's kind of like what you had described as far as anxiety, where there was like, I did kind of these OCD type things, and I still have it, but I kind of like, I don't know if you want to call it like matured version of it or how you deal with it. But the depression would still be surrounding just other things. So as like I started liking girls and stuff, I would have really negative thoughts about like, I mean, honestly, I'm like 13. I'm like, I'm going to die alone. Like,
Jesus, yeah.
And so, I mean, even the subject matter, so to speak, would change, even as, those extremely, like, formative years kind of come. But it would still be, like, depressive thoughts. And, I work as, like, I've always been kind of a class clown type person. And I know there's always that stereotype. It's not, just because you're funny in class doesn't mean you're depressed. Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of people are, though. And I didn't think of that as a defense mechanism. I just thought that joking around and doing stuff, like, keeps me out of my own head. And, like, that was, like, a big thing for me. And I was too aware of some of the dark realities of life at a young age. And I thought about them too much. And I'm not saying by any means like, well, I was an advanced thinker. I was very inquisitive. Believe me, if you could replay these kind of the way I thought about these things, they're probably very stupid. But I thought of them. And they just had an effect to where these thoughts would keep kind of like being present in my mind, and then it would just depress my mood.
Now, are these associated at any point throughout your childhood with any sort of attempt to take you to a hospital or get you seen out by a therapist or clinically figure out what's wrong with you, or are you hiding these things in such a way that even your closest family members didn't register it or didn't register it as something that was particularly concerning? Well,
so that's the thing, and this is like, going to like the wider experience of it. So mine, it depending on the mental health struggles you have, as they manifest differently, the way you can quote unquote get caught with it or how hard it is to hide can be difficult. Especially if like some kids younger are struggling with anxiety, that can manifest differently where they act out or they do certain things or they just look nervous or jittery. And then of course a lot of people are like, well, they have ADHD, obviously. No, but like mine, yes, it was hiding it, but there was some points where I remember one teacher I liked especially. It's just like, she was like, you just, is everything all right? And she would like ask that. I'd be like, yeah. And I, honestly, as far as like my home life at this certain point, I was like, it is totally fine. And she would just be like, I know, but I don't know. Sometimes you just look, she didn't use these words because I was younger, but like just disheveled or just a sort of like brooding like worry about you, and you'll participate in class, raise your hand, and it'll be fine. But that once you stop like basically talking out loud in class, you just return this thing, and like I'm just kind of worried. And I was brought up a couple times, like the guidance counselor sort of things. But I mean, as far as that went, like I kept up all the other stuff, like at the age of like played sports and did pretty well in school and kind of just did to get by and had friends and stuff like that. So I kind of just masked it, with, things are all right. Because I felt shameful about it, especially because it felt not just like, why am I sad? I'm a wimp, kind of like, at the time, like a sixth grade boy's mindset, like, I'm being a wimp. But I was also just like, I feel just different. I was like, I got to hide this and hopefully it'll just kind of go away. Or, I've heard about like, oh, we grow up and have growth spurts and hopefully I'll just like grow out of this. And so the real, my like first, okay, we're actually doing something about this was when I was 14 and went into counseling, went to see a counselor. And that experience was, it's hard for adults to go to counseling for the first time. And with kids, or for whatever you want to classify as like 14 or even younger in the high school or even just high schoolers, it's difficult with counseling sometimes because there is a large sense with younger people that their problems don't really matter. Like, oh, he's heartbroken because like, Susie broke up with him or something, or he didn't like, they're like, we have like grown up problems like mortgage and climate change and whatever. Like they just have their problems. And one way you can look at that is that like, well, that is their world though. So if something comes crashing down in their world, even if you think it's insignificant, that's their world. So it is important. But the reason I bring up that sentiment is that I know with some people I've talked with and what I had kind of felt is that like, we got to work this out. Either kind of like this is like a little phase thing, or it's like, are you sure you're not just kind of like hormonal, like in the sense of like, because this is like teenage stuff, and there is kind of a larger notion of like teenagers. Some of them go goth, or they're always depressed, or the classic trope of like the depressed teenager, especially with women. That idea that this is kind of phase like, and sometimes that is true, like but it's just like, you got to start everything with a blank slate. But a lot of times people were just like, I don't know how seriously they took it. And it's like, because I didn't have like real world, quote unquote, stresses, this wasn't maybe seen as serious. Some people had very good like experiences with counseling even at a young age. It so much relies. You just talk about the random like effects of your life, just a person that you get. I remember when I was like at that age, I had a horrible counselor, and I even knew at the time, but it didn't take much years away from retrospect to be like, he is just awful. I remember what he had done was that, again, kind of discounting my like whatever 14-year-old problems, he would keep like lecturing and doing these, like he would start to like he started taking more of the billable hours, so to speak. He would be talking more than I would, and it was kind of this like, young man, you'll learn this thing about life. And I think that one thing that comes difficult with it is because younger people can go through this stuff and then it passes. There's an idea it's like, we're not quite sure if you actually have clinical depression, or we're not quite sure this is going to be a lifelong thing. And say what you will of that effect on the person. I know, especially at my age, it wasn't seen as taken seriously. Or then on the flip side, it was taken really, really seriously out of nothing. Like if you kind of had even mentioned like self-harm, it's like, oh, he's a teenager, he's going to kill himself. Yeah. And it was just this weird, these two poles of like, your problems aren't really, but we'll get you out of this phase or whatever this may be, or he's going to kill himself. Like it was a really bad, like, sort of spectrum that just ping pong back and forth, and like not a lot in the middle. And I know, like, as we kind of go over stuff like this with my experience, that a lot of people have quite an opposite experience, especially with mental health of its onset, because as as the community at large knows, a lot of them come on at like this magic, the lucky number 23. Like, it can obviously vary, but a lot of people, especially like with bipolar, especially with schizophrenia, like it becomes acutely onset, like right in this kind of like right before your frontal lobe's supposed to be fully formed. Yeah. And some people have just been totally fine, relatively, and then it just comes on. I think it's, I don't.
I had the onset of anxiety after actually a drug experience at like 21. I think I told you this. I had a friend from Europe who moved in next door. He's a little bit older than me. He bought fucking bath salts off the internet, and he's like, you should do them with me, mate. So I started doing them, and like 2 days passed, and we were just like binging on this, basically speed, is what it was. Like no sleeping, like you're barefoot walking around your neighborhood with your eyes looking like raccoon eyes. And then after this 2 days of this intense, speedy drug experience of whatever the fuck chemicals were in that shit. A couple days later, 2 days later, after I come down, I just had this massive, out of nowhere panic attack. And I had never had one at that point yet. I thought I was dying, like I was at my girlfriend at the time's house, like in bed with her. And like I just started like getting real hot, and my heart started beating, and I was like, I gotta go. I just jumped up and ran out, like drove home, like sticking my head out the window, like, am I dying? Like, what's happening? And then for the next 6, 7, 8 months, I just had generalized anxiety all day, every single day. And then after that, kind of with no help, obviously, because I didn't have money. When that sort of fizzled out, then ever since then I've had these episodic experiences with anxiety. And so it was like it was one of those onsets. I was 21, so it was right at that time that you're talking about. But I always question, like, was that always going to come, especially given my OCD past, or was that induced by this drug abuse that I was doing for, this binge on speed that I did? Or was it always going to manifest, but the speed just kind of kicked open the door for it to manifest at that time? I don't know. But it is true that a lot of these mental illness issues can really pop onto the scene in this very crucial age between like 21 and 25.
Right. Yeah, and like, man, that just basalt.
So fucking stupid. Don't ever do shit you
Right, it's like PCP, which, by the way, I always thought it was weird they called PCP angel dust. Like, if you didn't know anything, you'd be like, oh, that sounds pleasant. It's
demonic
like,
dust.
Absolutely, it's not. It's very eating faces in Florida. But
no, I had a friend who died on PCP. Not a friend, but a friend of a friend who died on PCP here in Omaha several years back, and it manifested in this manic. He was behind the wheel and just went fucking wild with it, and just traffic in Midtown Omaha or whatever, just 70 miles an hour until eventually the car crashed and he died. Just ripped off PCP. But yeah, that shit's dangerous.
I think what I've read and just testimony from other people, I think that you talk about, like, basically the question of, like, what if I never did that?
Yeah.
Would I have this? Maybe, obviously, I would still have anxiety, but I wouldn't have this form of it or something. And I think that's true. Where I think people have, like, potential for it to turn a certain way, and then an experience can kind of shape. Again, I'm sorry for using this word so much, but it could shape the way it manifests at a certain point. Because my my brother, he dealt with anxiety. He was like super, like, I talked about ADHD. He was like a hummingbird, dude. And I always call this like yin and yang, because I had depression and stuff like that, very quiet on my own. He was the exact opposite. But he had struggled with anxiety. And then when he was in Iraq, he had a few hairy situations, you want to call it, where it was dangerous. But it wasn't during that. He just, when he was on base one day and I just watched, he had this huge panic attack. And from that point on, like, not like very much, but he started having panic attacks, and he never had those before. He had anxiety problems, but he never had panic attacks before. And, immediately when you hear that, you're like, well, yeah, I mean, you're deployed in this foreign country as a young person with this, you're holding guns all day, and, like, there's dangerous, people from just over that camp over there where 2 people died, of course, maybe that's what induced it. But I would think of it more as maybe you have that potential within you, and then it just takes a spark of something, and then it can shape the way it comes out of you. I mean, that goes without saying, and I'm talking more out of like a specific experience rather than trauma, because obviously trauma is its own sort of
impetus
beast. I guess the point I was trying to make is trauma can create it. I think with a lot of people, the potential's there. It didn't create it, but something spurned on a way that it would manifest from you.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, then, as you come into adulthood, what specific mental illnesses have you personally struggled with, and sort of how did that look as you get into your 20s and beyond? Right.
So and this is, obviously a huge topic, and one that I also did have, pretty heavy experience with, is that what really changed things up and kind of changes the trajectory to what's like, who knows how things would have been, is the involvement in drugs and alcohol. Because there was at a certain point where when I started, I didn't really get super addictive right away, actually. There was but it was like drinking and weed, and it was kind of an event to do with somebody. And I got so blasted the first time. I was like, there was nothing to enjoy. But
blasted on alcohol and weed.
Oh yeah,
first time you tried it.
Yeah, the first time, and there were just a few events. But when I had gotten to like opiates as I had started out, and I had that high, that changed things because that became a way that I was going to control it. And obviously, there's just a like dual diagnosis is a huge problem. Because obviously it exacerbates whatever, internal and mental and emotional issues you have. And it also does so many things to block you from being able to properly get help. Mm-hmm. I mean, it does it on every level. Like one thing is that I know a lot of people, and I'll admit I had done this to myself, where I was just like, man, just counseling's not helping. And it's like, okay, have you told them everything? Like, well, yeah, basically. It's like, do you tell them how much you drink? I may leave some stuff out of that, And it's just like the moment you start hiding something like that from your counselor, it's like, yeah, dude, it's not going to work. And especially you just want to talk about with prescription medication. If you're drinking or using drugs, that's not going to work. The type of like way you have to engage with therapy and like positive behaviors, that's not going to work. So, I mean, if you can even think of it, even if the drugs and alcohol don't create more of the internal like turmoil, just think of it as just a roadblock anyways, though. Right. Like it's so I bring that up because I will say one thing, as I brought up the maladaptive daydreaming, like that type of stuff, that would start to get more out of hand the harder I drank. Like I would really go into it.
To the point where the line between reality and daydream starts to blur a little bit?
Yes. So like that as one part where there was basically when I was about 23, I was diagnosed with schizoaffective. And
what is that exactly for people that don't know?
Yeah, so schizoaffective is you basically it's a little bit in between of schizophrenia where you might not have such acute sort of like audio and visual hallucinations, but it involves like breaks with reality in a sense. Like it involves, again, some of those more cognitive things. And it's also like based on like a behavioral disorder where, the influx of depression or anxiety. So it's kind of like in a sense... not the exact way, but one way you could describe it is it's kind of like a sort of bipolar, but with those kind of cognitive or, delusional sort of effects to it as well.
And that once you're diagnosed with something like that, that's a lifetime diagnosis? You have this issue?
I mean, no, but it changes the game. And this is one thing we can get into as well, too, is that when I say it changes the game, when you cross into the more cognitive things, again, the dissociative or identity or schizophrenia.
Realization, stuff like that.
When you, again, and not if you actually have it, but when you cross into it, the drugs you're prescribed are different because of the severity and the way, like, they're not just like trying to alter mood, like things like serotonin and dopamine. They're trying to also remedy like cognitive problems that you have.
From like antidepressants or anti-anxiety to antipsychotics.
Exactly. And a lot of people too, like antipsychotic kind of is a scary word because like, sometimes like people take like Seroquel and it's like antipsychotic and it's like, you're not like Looney Tunes or anything like that. But so I just wanted to say that quickly. Like a lot of people aren't even unaware that they take antipsychotics, quote unquote. But to your point, yes, you're starting getting sort of like much more, how would I put it? Like, much more effective sort of medicine. And effective, I mean the way it really affects your body and mind. Because it needs to, in a sense, because usually it's for people with paranoid schizophrenia where it has to like stop some of those cognitive things like its delusions and voices and just things like that. And the issue with me, and I take this fully on my own fault, is that I never really, when I was dealing with like drinking and stuff and they knew like I had been admitted to psych wards and stuff. And I finally like talked about my maladaptive daydreaming, but I never before with any other counselor. So what they thought was that, oh, this is the onset of schizophrenia or something of that sort. And that was me because I just never talked about it. So it seemed like, oh, it's coming on now.
Oh, because you just started talking about it.
Because I just started talking about it. And because I had, and I had gotten to a level now where because of the amount that I was drinking, it was starting to affect me. Like a lot of people that are just like quote unquote super normal people, they drink super heavily. it will actually start to affect them cognitively. Like they have a thing like, alcohol delirium, and they have the DTs, the delirious tremors. Like it actually will get to a level where you start even, quote unquote, the most normal people, you'll start seeing shadow people during like withdrawals and stuff like that.
Several times my dad went through it when he would withdraw from hardcore alcohol use. And
Right.
he would call me and think I'm his brother and talk about some shit happened 30 years ago, or just, just incoherent.
So you can imagine this sort of trident of things coming together where I finally have achieved a level to where the amount of drinking, if I go through any sort of withdrawal, will cause that. I have this thing that I actually had all my life that is this quasi sort of cognitive thing. Again, it's its own little, like maladaptive daydreaming seems more of a symptom. Like I said, it's not in the DSM or anything.
Sure.
But I never talked to anybody about that. And now I'm like being hospitalized. So like those three things, it's like, oh, this is clearly, he's reaching that age now. It was about 23. He's reaching that age. This is when we'll put it as schizoaffective, but this is when it's like schizophrenia is coming on. Or this is when, this more severe mental illness.
So schizoaffective would be like a level of intensity below schizophrenia proper or paranoid schizophrenia. It's some of the characteristics, but not that full blown, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, honestly, and I think there's a more qualifying and probably better definition of it, like textbook wise.
Sure.
But for the most part, I mean, I'm just relaying it of how it was like basically diagnosed for me. It was just like, you got some of these sort of, we hate to use the word, but psychotic features, like breaks with reality and stuff like that. And obviously you have like a mood disorder of a sort with your depression. And I would also go through like mania when I drink, just in a sense of too, like some people have mania when they drink because they go all crazy and stuff, like in the sense of like, woo, they're excited and stuff. Sure. But I would have that. So they really thought
in your last episode on alcoholism, you talked about, I don't know if it would be mania proper, but like, random spontaneous road trips to different states with no plan, right? Like stuff like that.
Oh, for sure. I actually think that wasn't bipolar mania, but that is mania proper because that's the things people do in mania. Just get up in the car and go. Just stay up for days without stimulants. Yeah. And so at that age, right at that time, all of that was coming together and like that's why I wanted to bring this perspective because I have this sort of weird relationship with like the more severe mental illness, even though it would ultimately kind of be incorrect. But I'd also say that, I mean, I don't want to say it's just on me, but I don't want to blame it on the people I worked with either. It was just this problem where I didn't admit the things I needed to. And I was like trying to get help, but I was still drinking. And then I just let it like any sort of gains that you have in your mental health. And then you like, if you start drinking or using again, it sets it all back. And that's what's so difficult for a lot of people. You talk about younger people with the, kind of the epidemic of mental health issues that we have with younger people. I don't know if like drugs are being, used more like than it was 20 years ago. But one thing that is proven is that drugs are much stronger and much more like influential on your mental and emotional state. I mean, drinking's still the same, but with a lot of drugs, and not even just fentanyl, but you talk about like the qualities of weed and stuff like that. They've done like things for the 70s weed as compared to weed today.
Fuck the weeds when we were kids. We had Reggie. We called it Brown Frown. It was sticks and stems or seeds, and it was it was almost fucking happy. Sometimes you just smoke a blunt of it and get a headache.
Dude, we just smoked arugula.
And we had this thing called Kind Bud that once in a while somebody would have that we could get.
This one's different because it has THC.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what made it kind, dude.
But nowadays you have fucking concentrates and wax, and you can fucking dab 90% THC straight to the dome.
Yeah, they have ones that like it just has like a reaper on it. It says mental colonoscopy. And you're like, what does that even mean?
I don't know. I'm gonna smoke it.
But so that's what like one thing that I wanted to cover because I know I talked about it a lot on your last podcast, and so I'm not doing it because this is kind of my area. I'm doing it because truly the dual diagnosis, and you talk about comorbidity with alcohol and drugs involved in mental health, it's a destroyer. I mean, it destroys everything because, like I said, it impedes you from progress. It'll take away progress you made. It blocks you from stuff if you're actively drinking and using. You can't take prescription medications. You're not going to be really into therapy if you're going at all, or it's basically, as I'd put it, useless. It's like not the therapist's fault or it's not the psychiatrist's fault. And if I don't tell them everything that's going on, what are they supposed to? It's like going to a doctor and not telling them, the physical thing that's with you, and then being mad that they didn't diagnose you with whatever like ailment you had.
Right.
And I don't want to put blame on anybody, but that's just one of the struggles that happens with a lot of people. And like sometimes I wondered, it's because it came on depression, as I'm speaking of, because it came on early and I felt its effects without drugs and alcohol, because I felt it too in times of like sobriety. There was times though where I'm just like, at a certain point, I'm like, I say I'm going through depression right now, but I'm like actively like a raging alcoholic. The life of a raging alcoholic is depressing. It would be weird if I wasn't depressed. Right. So like maybe this isn't depression. It's just my life is shitty. And, so there's a lot of things like that kind of block the help that you're seeking because it derails you. And of course, you're not trying to do it. I mean, you're just actively trying to find some remedy from the sadness or the worry or the turmoil.
Precisely. And on the other side of that coin is dealing with this stuff without recourse to any sort of help at all, which I've talked about at length, going through periods of depression and extreme anxiety. I've never been able to have access to medicine, or therapist or anything like that. And so then I actually turned to drugs, specifically marijuana, as a way of coping with specifically depression. For me, marijuana was like a medicine that I resorted to in lieu of any other help, that during depressive episodes that would last for many months, it would be like, I can smoke this stuff, and at least it's like having your mouth come above the water a little bit and take a breath because of that mood lift and that general sense of like kind of well-being that marijuana gives for me. So literally like smoking weed to deal with my depression because I have no recourse anywhere else, but then also having a compulsive relationship with marijuana for the rest of my, up until today, because of having to rely on it so heavily in those times, So I think like, yes, drugs and alcohol obviously are a block and an exacerbator of so many things, and it probably exacerbated something maybe like anxiety within me while I'm trying to treat depression. But on the other hand, given our brutal healthcare system and the lack of access many people have, they can sometimes turn to substances as a way to try to manage the symptoms of mental illness, which can sometimes work, but it's kind of like whack-a-mole in the sense of like if I'm using high intensity marijuana to, rocket me out of a depressive episode for a few hours, it could also maybe lead to the emergence of an anxiety issue because I'm drowning my brain in THC every day to control one thing. It gives rise to something else. Or, you're drinking alcohol because you're stressed or you're trying to deal with anxiety. Before you know it, you're doing it compulsively. It makes you depressed, right? So it's like I'm trying to use this substance because I don't have access to anything else to alleviate the symptoms of this thing. But once I'm getting a grip on this thing, because I'm using the substance, it produces another thing,
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's difficult enough, but like I should at least, even though it didn't work out at all, I'm just grateful that I had the option of going to a counselor. Yeah. A lot of people don't have any of that stuff. And you talk about like downtrodden, impoverished communities, like it's already a learned behavior in a lot of them, drug and alcohol use. Yeah. It runs in the family. And so if you have a person that has a predilection towards mental illness, maybe they wouldn't have become a drug or alcohol user, become substance dependent, but because that's their environment, because of such a lack of other resources or support, that is the way they're going to solve it. And like I have stated previously, there's some times where once you let drugs and alcohol hijack your brain, at a certain point, now it doesn't matter. Like, let's say you sort of, quote, get out of like the struggle, or you find some way to get in a different tax bracket status, and you can now get these things. Once you've started the path of addiction, though, you have to go into overdrive to get some help, because now you've learned a way. It's like, this is how I'm going to cope with anxiety, or even those cognitive ones. When I'm starting to feel weird, like I will, a lot of like paranoid schizophrenics love meth because of the way it embraces the paranoia. And I mean, it sounds crazy in a sense, but it makes them more comfortable with, if they had a sober mind, it would be more bothersome that they have these thoughts. Like that causes a lot of discomfort in the, like some of the schizophrenics that I had worked with, is that cognitive dissonance of having like the voices or having these delusions, but also aware like, these aren't real though, but I believe them, but they're not real. In the same way a lot of panic attacks are, where you go, I know I'm not dying, but I'm dying.
Yes,
that struggle of like, And so a lot of people, they like the drugs and alcohol because it blurs that. So it's almost in kind of a way, it's like, screw it, we'll go off in this adventure. I'll embrace my paranoia. I'll do all this type of stuff. And, going back to your point on that societal level, though, yeah, if you don't have access to any sort of mental health services or just opportunities for something, and drugs and alcohol take the wheel, I can tell you personally, it's hard to course correct because I got to say one thing, drugs and alcohol, they sure work. Yeah. Not long term, but man, do they work.
Absolutely. So you said earlier the schizoaffective diagnosis that you got was ultimately, I think you implied, was a misdiagnosis, or that I think you implied that it's actually you don't feel as if you do have schizoaffective disorder some 10 years after that initial diagnosis.
Right, and yeah, I mean it's one of those things where it's like it's hard to sound defensive without being defensive, or it's hard to be defensive without being defensive. It's like I swear to guys, I'm not crazy. No, I mean the reason why it's a misdiagnosis is that the time I've spent sober, I don't deal with breaks with reality or delusion. The breaks with reality, that type of stuff, like I even talked about with the maladaptive daydreaming stuff, I still was aware that it wasn't reality. I just liked these stories, or felt like I needed to create these stories, but I never believed they were true. Mm-hmm. It was only during the heavy, intense, like just full mood swings and sort of mental swings that came from like hard alcohol use. And sometimes not even just like particularly hard alcohol use, but just like drinking so much over an amount of time, your body deteriorates. You're not getting any sleep, so things start crumbling. And so those psychotic features of mine, they only came out with not only the help of alcohol, but with like very sort of acute events to it. One of the things that I've worked with my psychiatrist and like, as far as, like readjusting the diagnosis or, even take away diagnosis, readjusting the type of help, like medication-wise and therapy that I need, kind of coming to this as like, this stuff does not occur if I'm not in the full-blown active alcoholism. That's one thing, it never occurred soberly or quote-unquote normally. There was never any onset of that. People with schizoaffective, that occurs whether they're drinking or not.
Right. So in lieu of the drinking, what mental health issues have you come to realize you actually do have, even without alcohol being present?
Depression for sure. And that's one thing that would be hard to keep away from drinking, in the sense that it feels so pervasive and that like it won't go away. And then, another thing is just those negative thoughts. Depression, it can take the physical forms as far as the low energy, low libido, low basically everything that makes you active. Mm-hmm. Like the one awesome trap of depression is that it takes away your ability to do the things you need to get better.
Right, yeah.
And
going out, being social, exercising, just trying to get out in the world in any way, you don't have the energy and the motivation is completely absent. So you get into this negative spiral of, I don't want to fucking do anything. So you don't do anything. So you feel worse, etc.
Right. There was times, honestly, where I'd be doing fine sober for a little bit, and then a wave of depression would hit, and I'd feel worse physically than I did when I was drinking every day. Mm-hmm. Like even from the hangovers or the exhaustion that comes with doing that stuff. And it was just like these, it was the same thing where you have like quote unquote authentic depression, and then you have what you feel the chemical imbalance or the clinical or whatever you want to call it. And I know the difference between that because one of the big things for me, I should say, by the way, if I ever say you or anything, like I don't mean to sound like advice or something, just know that like every time I'm giving advice, I'm really just talking to myself in the past.
Sure.
But like the difference I'd feel is that with like quote unquote normal sadness and things like that or disappointment, there's emotion tied to it. That's one way I know that this is the depression because there's not really emotion tied to it. It's more so of like a sort of apathetic hopelessness, just a lethargic nature, not only to you physically, but to you like kind of mentally and emotionally. Yeah. And that's kind of like one sort of like, I don't know, barometer I use is when I know it's more like this sort of like clinical depression is that there's not emotions behind it.
Yes.
And that was particularly one thing of what drinking too was hard to stay away from because it also quote unquote made me feel alive. And then one last thing is that the maladaptive daydreaming, that type of stuff is still there. But like as I get in a better like mental state, I'm able to just kind of blow it off. But
you're able to put it where it properly belongs as mere daydreaming. Because you're sober and your sober mind allows you to make those distinctions and not let the blurriness start.
Oh yeah, and honestly, not even let myself normal daydream. I don't think I have that ability. I I don't do it. If I start doing it, I just have to remedy it by being active with something else.
Just out of curiosity, how long is your sober streak so far?
I believe today is 86 days.
Nice, man. Congrats. I think, I can't remember which one it was. Maybe it was a Patreon episode where you had come back after a relapse fairly soon. But 86 days, that's awesome. Are you feeling good? Are you feeling different this time? I know you've talked about, or I've seen me and you go exercising a lot. We go hiking and doing, we did a cold plunge in a lake last week. Pretty fun. So I see you're being active. Seems like things are going well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and they completely are. Like when I had that much longer stretch of sobriety, there's almost like seasons to it. Sometimes you're like, I completely changed my life. And then like a month later, you're like, oh, man, I'm never escaping this horrible state. I might as well drink. You can kind of go back and forth. But I feel really great now because I'm still struggling with stuff. There is still depression there. But I just feel more capable in fighting it. And I would say, honestly, you've been a huge part of being able to have a friend and someone to do like these proactive and actually fun, not just because they're healthy, but like fun activities is important. I mean, that's something we can also maybe get into later as far as mental health is concerned. The community, social, and friendship, is so important. But yeah, like that's one thing again where I kind of go to that drawing line of like, this is clinical or is this just life stuff? I can kind of feel those heavy clouds kind of clog my head where I just think kind of these negative, cynical things and I don't want to do a whole lot. And I just like, whatever about life. I don't hate you life. I nothing you life, that type of indifference. I feel those come on, but I feel definitely more equipped to deal with them. And I not only just avoid them, sometimes distraction's good, but I sometimes with like mindfulness and stuff, I take them head on and I feel like I get some resolve from doing that too. Absolutely. But, it takes upkeep, though, too. It's not like there's been any like code that's cracked. Honestly, these things that have helped me, I've known all along. Just whether being able to apply them is just a huge difference. Again, you talk about depression or mental health problems. Even with anxiety, it debilitates you from being able to do the things that you need to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I've used mindfulness to very interesting extents with regards to mental illness, and obviously suffering itself got me interested in Buddhism and the practice associated with it. But even recently with the death of my father, I was already going through a prolonged period of like deep sort of suffering and depression. I think we've talked about it before, that feeling, you mentioned it a little bit earlier in this episode, that feeling of complete hopelessness. It almost sits like a ball of iron in your stomach, of like when you talk about a wave of depression. That would manifest as this like feeling in this physical sensation in my stomach of like a lead ball sort of thing. I don't know.
No, I gotcha.
Yeah.
It's the heavy empty.
Yeah,
how could something that's so empty be so heavy?
Hell yes. So I actually used, and I don't even know, this kind of is getting off into speculation land, but because my father, I loved him so deeply, but also he was a core of especially a lot of the childhood precarity and uncertainty that I dealt with. And it felt like when he passed, as hard as that was, and I still grieve to this day over it because I loved him so deeply. But when he passed, it felt like there was an opportunity spiritually to kind of address some stuff that had been weighing me down since childhood, and specifically the long periods of practice on the feeling of hopelessness itself, on the staying with that iron ball in my stomach. For protracted, we're talking weeks and months, not just something you do once, right? And eventually I had this very interesting moment within a meditation session when I felt that ball of iron that was synonymous with hopelessness. You called it perfectly the heavy empty. I felt it dissolve. And it felt as if my staying with it, as opposed to running from it, trying to distract myself or cover it up through drugs and alcohol or the earlier coping mechanisms that I would have used, but the staying with it and the watching it and perhaps the passing of my father marked an opportunity for me to address it, and I felt it sort of dissolve. I felt like this moment in a meditation session where it grew. It's kind of like a star goes supernova, explodes, and then what's left is, nothing. Like it's gone. And I had that amazing experience with the help of a sort of spiritual teacher that I would reach out to and talk to as I went through this stuff. And she was very encouraging and it was basically saying, you're doing the right thing. This is a serious moment when you've confronted a thing that you've been carrying since childhood, probably definitely related to, your relationship with your father. And through this practice, you've been able to look at it in the eyes and move on from it, sort of like deal with it really fully. And the torment that I went through for several weeks was the inevitable process of dealing with it, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
and the consequences of looking it in the eye is not an immediate sense of well-being. It's like, no, you have to travel through the dark forest before you can come out the other side, you know?
Absolutely. And I think that's one thing, too, like, as far as you're talking about, I mean, you talk about the dissolving of it, and in some cases where that even seems impossible, or just not in the near future even possible, sometimes a big thing is, like, reframing. And so if you can get yourself in a good enough headspace, like, you know, as I mentioned, I would have like a preoccupation with death, especially in more depressive moods. And not just, and when I say that, not just like I want to die, but it would feed into like the finality and brittleness of life, and it's all stupid and pointless. You know, just those like pissy thoughts, you know, sort of things. It would feed into that, and you know, using through mindfulness, you know, using through like counseling and talking with other people, it was helping me able to reframe it where I could kind of use the finality of death to help me get through the mundane and boring. Like even
instead of death being the thing that haunts you, it could actually be seen as a thing that can liberate you from certain fears or anxieties or ruts that you're stuck in.
Or the biggest thing is even the mundane, because sometimes you just need a rescue from that. Like that, sometimes if your just mind is sedentary, you know, I mean, it's a hard to, as you've probably talked about many times, the eroding slog of job work and that sort of system you talk about, and that, you know, it's not exactly just like super negative emotions, but it's just like the feeling of being lost, or like I'm doing this stuff, this is what most of my day is type of stuff. Like I can use the feeling of death and its strong, scary finality of it to kind of inject a little bit of vigor of just even trying to enjoy the day, even if I'm doing something that's boring. Like trying to actually weaponize those feelings that are brought on by death in a good way, where it's just like, you know, this all goes into nothingness. It's kind of like in ways people talk about there's a bad nihilism and there's a good nihilism.
Honestly,
or maybe there's not either or, but it could be used in the way, you know, trying to talk about that reframing of things, that I can use this to now. It's like when depression would set in and it would linger very hard in my mind, especially during those mundane, you know, throughout the day, just like I'm just being a low-grade morphine drip of depression just going throughout the day, trying to use that to be more engaged with life and active in life. And I know that one that's a little bit different, but that a lot of people use as far as reframing is that they have like struggles and mental health issues that just seem like, what is the point of this stuff? Like, how am I going to reframe delusion, like struggling with stuff? How am I going to reframe just like this absolute like bitter anxiety that I feel all the time? And, you know, one way people try to do it is through altruism and through helping out people that have the same sort of suffering. And it's like, if anything, this has given me experience I can use to help other people. And I just think about that as you talked about dealing with the grief and the angst that comes with the relationship with your father, and using the mindfulness where, as you put it, like you take it head on and you look at it. And that's the only way you can begin to reframe things, is if you actually approach it. Right. And in my case, it's hard to approach those depressing feelings. You know, it's hard to like, no, let them stay or let them ride the wave, so to speak. It's like, I don't want to, because it's just
fucking brutal.
I feel like I'm thawing, you know, like I'm just like, I was a sturdy ice cube and I'm just melting under this. I'm just feeling more like a sad sack, and I just hate this. It's like, and feel it and see if just even getting some sort of energy, even if it's negative, from the feeling of it, embracing it and being like, all right, I will let this hit me like a wave. I got to feel something from that, right? You know, I don't know. That's just kind of more abstract, but that idea of reframing.
And there is, as we all know, no single silver bullet. And, you know, what works for me in one instance won't even work for me in another instance, let alone for anybody else in any other given instance. So it's really like a toolbox. I feel like I think about it in terms of like going through mental health struggles my entire life, off and on. And now I'm in my, you know, approaching mid-30s. There's a toolbox of coping mechanisms that you kind of gather up along the way. Like the first time depression hits you in the fucking face, you are completely at sea. Like you've never experienced it before, so you have no coping mechanisms. If you don't have anybody in your life that can relate to you or help you through it, you're even worse off. And it really does feel insurmountable. It feels like your brain is broken. But after going through depressive periods multiple times, you know, over and over and over again, you do kind of construct for yourself a toolbox of coping mechanisms, some on the less healthy side, some hopefully on the more healthy side, that you immediately start turning to when you feel it coming on the next time. I feel like every cycle of depression or anxiety that I've gone through, I have, because of the necessity of trying to find a way out, developed and searched and sought out and created ways for me to not get rid of the thing, but to blunt the sharpest edges of it such that I can make it through. And the experience of going through it multiple times shows you that there is an end. Like, in the midst of a depression episode, a dark one, for example, it can really feel like I'm never getting out of this. It really feels like I'm going to be like this for the rest of my life. What is the point? But when you feel like that several times and you've come out of it, then that next time you go in and you had that same thought and feeling, you can temper it. Yes, I'm thinking that thought, and it does feel like an tempting thought, and there might be some truth in it, but I've thought that before. And every time I've thought that before, I have come out the other side, and that's kind of a way to kind of help yourself not lose hope when you're in the midst of something. Having gone through it so many times, like not one time in my history of depression and anxiety has it never left, Every single episode I've had with either of those illnesses, as bad as they've gotten, they eventually subside. They eventually release their grip. And maybe a couple years later, I go through another period, but I'm more equipped. I know that these things pass. I have better coping mechanisms in my toolbox, and I can at least navigate this in a way that the first time or two or three that it happened, I had no fucking way to navigate it. And I have, over this, I don't want to get too detailed because it's not my personal story to tell, but a niece of mine very struggled with deep, deep depression recently, and made an attempt on her life, and called me, of all people, and after she had already, consumed a fucking smorgasbord of pills, and I was able to get her help acutely, get her in, go over there, more or less with 9/11 and the emergency responders, save her life, and then have been able to take my extensive experience with the exact thing she's going through to help her navigate that in a way that I never had when I went through my first depression episode. It felt completely isolated, completely alone, so scary. And I know she was going through that. I know damn well what she feels like. And so walking with her, talking with her, saying, I've been through this exact thing. You will come out the other end, etc. Now she's doing great. She's really got her feet back on the ground. Her life has shifted. The pandemic has ended, right? She was robbed of her entire 8th grade school year and was forced to go into 9th with no social friends whatsoever. Like, it's brutal. So that was probably a contributing factor. But I have been able to turn my terrible experiences with it, not only into better coping mechanisms for myself, but as you said earlier, turning that suffering into real help for other people that are going through it. And turning that suffering into compassion, turning that suffering into assistance for other people, instead of letting yourself be consumed by your own suffering. I don't know. It's nice that I could be for her what I wish I had for me at that time. And I hope it contributed to saving her life.
Well, absolutely. I think you talk about if it contributed to that. Like, at the very least, it contributed to her quality of life. If she has some, guidance is so important, to receive some sort of guidance. Like, you talk about, dealing with it alone. I remember when I felt it when I was younger, if someone could just verbalize it for me, and not just a counselor or somebody, not reading out of a textbook, but a friend, someone at least kind of close to my demographic, someone could do that. Wouldn't fix it by any means, but I would be seen as that aloneness is what makes it so burdensome and hopeless. Yes. Because it's just and again, it's just this thought distortion. I'm the only person in the world who could ever feel this way. And, you could look on that and be like, why would you ever think that? It's well, because I'm the only one that lives in my head. Right. I don't live in other people's heads. I don't know what their experience is like. And, it's awesome that you could have been able to do that for her. And, the other thing is that you talk about using that experience as far as benefits, it's an absolute win-win. Because it not only just helping the person, but it helps you tremendously.
Absolutely.
Sometimes people joke where it's this is helping me probably more than it helps you in the sense of not something obviously as drastic as that.
Sure.
But like, just in general, being able to help people, or at least feel like you are. Now, of course, there is a proper way to do that. I mean, if not, we'll get into the rigmarole of some of the pitfalls of like improperly trying to help. But properly sharing your experience, having that sort of a connected sort of struggle to where you don't feel alone and you feel that your problem has become at least sort of free range. Like there's a chance for it to not just stick next to you and just haunt you in that way, but it's like, oh, this is, and also, and this is as kind of, drastic as it may seem, also just to see another person who has described this exact same thing that I have, and they're doing all right.
Yes, exactly.
Oh my goodness, they're not doomed to, because if anything, it's like I might not be the only person who has this, but the other people that do kill themselves or are crazy homeless people. In kind of your immature mind, that's what you could think.
Or your depression-fueled thoughts can easily tend in that direction.
100%. And so, like, to see a person, especially probably with you, that she admires or has respect for, and you go, oh, I kind of want things that they have in their life, and they have this too, so it's not impossible.
Exactly.
Like, that's a huge thing. A lot of times, the way you, like, live can be a benefit to people. If you just have these moments where you talk every once in a while, but they can see you from afar and they know you struggle with the same things, that can be helpful.
Yes.
Extremely helpful as well.
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
And there's one thing I wanted to touch on when you were talking about where one thing that's is a big struggle, but it's a huge part of it is you were describing where, and you're right, where like that everything is temporary in the sense of like these waves of depression will pass. They always do pass. In the same way, even if you're addicted, the cravings that are going to last forever will pass. And yes, you can build more, faith in quote unquote the process, whatever you want to call the process. You can build faith in the process because you go, I had thought this was forever and then it wasn't. And I've done that like 5 times now.
Exactly right.
But here's one thing on the other side of it, just getting to another layer of it, though, is that I've been through that as well, where I'm like, I know these things pass. But you talk about the importance of quality of life, because at times where I'd be hopeless and suicidal, is like, sure, this will pass, but my life as it is not worth going through more of these things. Like, that's the thing about quality of life, where it's just like, fine, it's not all, it won't be this bad, but I can't predict how much my life will be, plagued by these sort of thoughts. But even my medium or my sort of like basic cable of my life is not very enjoyable. Like that's, I think, where some people get really hopeless, where even if people like, people, and I've thought this sentiment in my head, where people are like, dude, it's temporary, it will pass. I was like, even when it does pass, I don't really like my life that much, or it doesn't seem worth it to go through all this stuff. And like one, big thing that I think about is a lot of the aspects of seeking help with mental health that is, it's not based on the more like therapeutic clinical things, but like getting help, like just as, you talked about earlier, like the stuff that we've been doing, whether it's the stuff we've been doing or the friendship, has been hugely beneficial in this kind of, not just run for sobriety, but run for my well-being in general. And you talk about, this system, whatever you want to call it, or society as a whole, and people, dealing with mental health problems, and there being such a lack of community or a lack of ways of people to enjoy themselves, or the only way they know how to enjoy themselves is alcohol and drugs or destructive behaviors or relationships. Like, that can be such a struggle, because even if you're not in more of your, like, acutely awful phases of whatever, like, mental illness or disorder you have, if you don't have any good quality of life, really, like you feel like it outside of that, it can become a tremendous struggle as well. Because it's like, all right, it might not always be super awful, but my life's always medium awful, and I don't want this anymore.
Even without this shit, my life sucks.
Right. I mean, essentially, that's what it is. And I've been through that where I like, even sober, I'm like, I don't even know if I count waves of depression anymore. Maybe this is not a wave, this is a current.
Just bobbing in the ocean of it.
Yeah, like this is just a current. It's like, I guess it's a wave. Is it a wave if I've hated it all the way through? Yeah. And I bring that up because that's, if people are listening, I try to bring up sentiments that I know other people have had. It's like, yeah, I've heard that, this stuff passes, but those even in-between times don't feel worth it. Yeah. And I don't know how to elaborate on that. That's just kind of thoughts that have crossed my mind during it.
And if you thought it, other people out there have definitely thought it. I do want to kind of move or talk a little bit about medication for this this last example I gave with my niece, part of her getting out of that deep hole was actually medicine. It created a foundation where she could, it didn't solve the problem in and of itself, but it sort of, when you're totally lost in it, it was enough to lift her up just enough where other things could then become effective that weren't earlierly effective, And medication, I've had a really complicated relationship with medication because when I was young and I went to the psych ward for suicidal thoughts and deep clinical depression, I was prescribed medication. And I didn't feel as if it really worked, and maybe it's because I was young, I didn't give it enough time. But after a couple months of using it, I still felt really depressed, and so I kind of gave up on it. And then when I started having anxiety, at one point my dad came into town, and he did pay for me to go see a doctor, like a one-off visit to see if we can get anything. And he paid for it, so we did go there, and I fucking forget the name of the medicine. But it was supposed to be like an anti-anxiety medicine that is kind of in the realm of antidepressant as well. I'm not quite sure. But I was delivering pizzas at the time. I was like, okay, I'm going to start taking my medicine. And I popped, the first pill of this bottle I got to deal with my anxiety. And I went through this. It was a fucking drug high. What happened was I got this extreme elevation of mood, like scarily good, like into full mania. This has all happened in one fucking shift at work. Insane fucking mania. So I was like delivering pizza, music turned way the fuck up, felt fucking great. Like I just popped 3 Adderalls, like I was living it. And this only lasted for like 30 minutes though. And then boom, this one-time use, insane fucking crash to the point where I was full on panic, convinced I was dying, went to the ER because I was like, I am dying. I took this pill. And also like when you deal with anxiety and you're like, okay, I feel like I'm dying, but I know I'm not is one thing. But when it's brought on by a pill, like, okay, well, maybe it is the pill. Maybe I am really fucking dying. Maybe it did do something because there was actually a thing I can point to that I took earlier that I could be dying, So I went to the emergency room. They gave me a Valium, and then, I kind of stabilized, went home, whatever, and never touched that medicine again. Like, fuck that, I do not even want to risk that. And ever since then, I've just been personally, and this is not advice for anybody else, it's my personal hang-ups over it, been very, very scared of any of these medicines and have really recoiled from them completely ever since that experience, for better or worse. But other people have had completely different experiences, right? Like I just said, my niece was really helped out by the medicines that her doctors gave her because it catapulted her into an area where she could at least start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and was a foundation for her to completely approve. Now talking to her mom and stuff, like, okay, but this should be temporary, right? I don't want her because she went through a terrible experience at this teenage year, situation, and she got out of it with this medicine to now be a lifelong user of this medicine. I feel like 6 to 8 months of a medicine in her circumstance, and every circumstance is different, is enough to kind of get her out of the rut and let her life go forward, and she can leave it all behind. I wouldn't want to see her taking the same medicine at 30. Right? It would seem antithetical to any logic that she would need to be still taking this thing. But other people do need it, and other people swear by it, and other people say I need it every fucking day, and if I don't get it, I really will start spiraling, and so I completely accept that as well. So all of that complication on the table and understanding that these medications, especially these anti-depression medications, are blunt instruments, and the individual, is so individual and unique that what works for one person can actually be a horror show for another, and vice versa. So I'm just wondering what your experiences with medication are, and if you're still on medication right now.
Yeah. So I mean, this is another process. I'm not going to talk about the efficacy of particular medications or it's just going over the experience of trying to get it right, trying to use it, the pitfalls, the benefits, stuff like that. You brought up a point in just what you're talking about where, you haven't gone back to it because of that experience. And the biggest thing about medication is that, of course, we don't take them unless we need to. Mm-hmm. They're not like multivitamins or anything, So, I mean, in your, experience, you haven't gotten to a point where it's just the things are so bad I have to go back and try it, and that's totally fine. That's kind of the way we do most things with our life, right? And
that could still be ahead of me. I could in my 40s go through some horrific thing be very open to going back and trying out a different medication or something.
Now you sound like my brain, always to the negative. But yeah, so that's the thing, right? So what I was going off of about the NEAT thing is that one of like the initial issues in the pursuit of medication is that you never start medication when things are pretty good, right?
Right.
And the basically when it comes to any sort of psychoactive medication, or at least antidepressants, when it comes to those, anything that happens instantly is bad. Even if it's like that, whatever, Adderall hot. It would have been so funny, by the way, if you had just been like, I can't remember what the medication was. Oh, 40 milligram Adderall. Like,
no, it was not that.
No, I know. But, so I had to crack at least one.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I had to crack at least one. But no, anything that happens instantly is I'll just say is not a good thing, because that's not how they're supposed to work. So like usually, just what you described, getting into like, everybody always jokes, which is morbid, but it is kind of funny, where the commercials for antidepressants is like first thing when they have to list side effects, may kill yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's like,
may result in suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, it's like one of those things like diet pill side effects. You may get fat as hell.
It's like,
wait, what? But the thing is, and like when you talk about stories like that, one thing, and this is just the way human nature works too, is that they are rare, but of course they're novel. Like they're the ones you would talk about. So like how many people talk about like, that was pretty good.
Yeah. Or I felt nothing.
Right. Like no one is going to talk about things. So yes, you get a lot of talk about side effects, and they are a huge problem. And you won't get talk for people that works, but in a sense, people are going to take them if they feel they need them, right? But when you feel that you need them, what I talk about, like only like not great things happen instantly, the way it's supposed to work is like gradual. It is such I don't know if there's like a real sort of academic point to make about it, but it just sucks because you reach out to look into medication because obviously you're in a bad place. And then this is what my first experience of it was like. It was just like coming to the psychiatrist's office, and it's just like, dude, I've been depressed before, but man, I've really started thinking about like the scary sort of hopeless ideas, like, suicidal ideation. And it's been just, oh man, it's been really difficult. And I just come to the point now where, I don't know, I need some sort of help, like chemically, like with medication. And basically, essentially, the psychiatrist would be like, all right, here's what, I know you're in this really dire state. Here's what we're going to give you. This is a thing, could take 4 weeks for it to work. We don't even know if it'll work. And also it may have side effects that you hate.
Yeah.
See you later.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't mean like to dog on it to make it sound like it's at all a bad idea to do this, but that's the reality of it though, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's so like, man, it sucks because these things are slow acting. And at the point where, you don't reach for the life preserver when you're swimming just fine. And so you're at this low state and you're just like, wait, I have to wait how long? And that's if it works. And it's not even going to be that like effective. It's not going to make me instantly happiest. Fuck this, dude. Like, it's a harsh reality. And the truth about like, antidepressants is that it's weird. It's almost kind of a paradox in the sense where it's like, no, they're not going to make you 100% better. And I don't know what way you don't want to quantify it. I always thought about they help you, they give you the opportunity to be well. They will not make you well, but it gives you the opportunity for it. In a sense, it's like I said earlier with my niece, it lifted the floor. The foundation, yes. Yeah. And the funny thing is that in a way it works. Let's say it makes you 10% better in a sense, right? But the thing is, it gives you the opportunity because it can be a chain reaction. Like, remember I discussed before is that the trap of a lot of these things is that it makes you not want to do the things you need to do. Yep. You could still be and probably will be if you immediately start taking them in a depressed state, not in a great place. But now with the medication, you might have just enough energy to go out and do something for yourself, right, exactly. To shower. We're not even talking about exercise, to do basic stuff. You can start doing that. You build a little bit off that. And now at a certain point, it's not even the medication. It is in its own way, an indirect way, but it's not the medication propelling you to go from being able to shower and brush your teeth to being able to go to work for a little bit, right. Being able to talk to people. It's not doing that. But because you've started to improve little by little with those things, you can move on to higher like things of help or activity you can do. And it all started because you were able to do it.
Exactly. It's like the impetus of a positive spiral. We talk about depression leading to this negative spiral. it could be just enough to have an opening to where you can maybe start turning that spiral upward. And then, that's the real help that it offered you,
Right, because it's all like that's what it's supposed to do, right? Where, it's kind of alarming if some people are like, yeah, I just started taking insert medication and I felt immediately better. And you're like, wait, day one? Like, yep. And you're like, okay. I mean, that's cool. If I wish the best for you.
Yeah.
I hope it's that one drug from Brave New World or whatever, where you feel great and you go on from there. But that also wasn't a very good book, like in the sense of how it turns out. But like the sense of it really has to always go in tandem with other things too.
Yeah.
And there is a sense, and this is just a sort of like a consciousness of at least the American society, but a lot of them too, where that instant gratification thing, or that I want it and I need it now, like you pop the pill and it solves the thing. And that's the other thing too, is that we're actually kind of used to that in some respect. You pop the allergy medication, you pop the thing for your low-grade headache, that goes away. Yeah. You do the thing for what have you, your strep throat, like all that stuff. So we've almost built that into our mind. So now you have the pill. It's for the inside boo-boos. The inside ouchies. My low-grade headache about existence. But I pop that and it goes away and it's like, no, it doesn't. And as you said, and it's like, if there's one thing everybody can agree on is that like, there's no prediction of how it's going to affect people. Absolutely. In the sense they have predictors of this will be better applied to you, or there's higher chances of such, but you just have to honestly you have to try it and see. And a lot of people, when they even get, you talked about in your story, like your dad had to basically like paycheck advance for you to get mental health help, and like
a one-time thing too, not any consistent treatment.
Right. And you talk about that, and a lot of people, like you go with the try and see thing, and it's like they don't have any real safety net to keep this going. And like, we tried this once, we're done. Like, like you have to try different medications, like things like that. And it's just like a lot of people don't have the ability to do that. And not even talking about the more external things, like about like financial ability or the resources, but also some people don't have the mental ability to stick with it, because during that try and see part of it, it's really hard. Or again, if you have the alcohol and drugs involved, there's one thing that works really fast and this thing that works really slow, if it even works at all. And by the way, it's not going to make you high, or it's not going to change everything. You still have to do 90% of the work.
Let me ask you this about prescription medication costs, because obviously in America we're triply fucked in this regard. And like I said, I haven't done medicine for a long time, but if you don't have, and you might not have the answer to this, but if you don't have insurance, what is the cost of maintaining a SSRI fucking prescription? Do you have any sense of that?
How much does meth cost? Because you might as well start doing that. So what's insane...
That was a joke. Don't do meth, guys.
100%. I've been holding back on some jokes, but I don't keep it all.
You can let them rip. Fuck it. We're over almost an hour and a half.
If you're still listening, you're now into the Dave zone. No, but the thing is that medications... pricing makes no sense. Nobody has any idea how like any of the shit works. It's all ambiguous artificially. They make it complex on purpose. And what essentially happens is, so like most people, a lot of work I did when I was doing case management is making sure people can get on the government program so they could be able to get medication. Like that was always priority number one for sure. And of course, it's an insanely difficult process, which by the way, the difficult process should be finding the medication for them in that process. Not just like, you filled out this form, so 6 more months with untreated schizophrenia.
And that's the thing with every social safety net, quote unquote, program in the US is it's really hard to get on it. And once you're on it, they're constantly trying to purge you. They're constantly trying to find little things. You didn't turn this paper in on time or whatever. And then that lack of continuity when it comes to fucking food stamps or housing security or medicine can throw your entire life into turmoil just because you caught a bad break. Or maybe you had insurance, but you got fired from your job because there was a fucking pandemic you couldn't control that shut down your industry. And now you don't have the money to fucking be able to afford the medicine. So then, the continuity is cut off once again.
So, and here's the thing too. Like, there's this sense that it's basically, this is almost kind of the societal feeling you get from the system where, and this is something I experienced a lot, was that, hey, you better be a worthless loser or it's going to be more expensive. In the sense of like, if you're not fully covered on like Medicare or Medicaid or some incredibly contrived, like, social thing where at least it is available. Mm-hmm. if you're in a middling job,
Yeah.
some sort of working class, or one that I was in, I mean, just retail, stuff like that, it makes no sense because so the better paying jobs you have, the prescription and shit is cheaper,
Yes.
and the less better paying jobs you have, it's more expensive.
Yep.
So there was legitimate times where I was looking at, like it said, the process is arduous. I mean, to go through and find what works for you, it's like, we hope this will affect you. I mean, you're talking even crazy things as far as medication as like how your body metabolizes it, how it processes. I actually take medication for that. So because I didn't have a good like system of actually just not even in the brain, like reuptake, but like just metabolizing it in my body. It's
So you have a separate pill to help metabolize.
Yeah, it's like it's methylfolate and it's prescribed a lot. But with that being said, so it's an incredibly hard process, and it's like good if you can find the one thing. I can't tell you how many times where I was in the office, clickety clack, looking it up. Okay, with your insurance, it's going to be about this month. I'm like, guess we're not doing that. Like literally, we finally crafted these could work best for you for your mental well-being. Yeah. It's like, wait, do you have Blue Cross Blue Shield, or do you have like,
right.
What do you have? And it's like, well, I have this. It's like, well, maybe we'll get something else.
and this is a bigger problem in our society when it comes to the social safety net, because it makes like what we would call, and I don't like this term because I think it obscures class relations, but the middle class, they can get very angry at the poor because the poor get benefits that they don't have. So if you're rich enough, it's not a problem. You get anything you fucking want in this country. If you're poor enough, you can tap into things like Medicaid or food stamps. But if you just earn just a little bit too much, where you're still abjectly struggling, you obviously need help, especially access to what I would consider human rights, medicine and fucking doctors and housing and stuff like that, then you can't get it, but you see somebody that's a little poorer than you be able to get it. And so you often come across these, not very politically informed people who will just have an intuitive sense of rage at the people below them. Like, oh, they can get help, but I work a job. I'm actually going to work every day, and I fucking need help, but I can't get it. But that person that doesn't go to work every day is getting the government help, right? You see this all the time with any social program. It's often racialized, but class is at the core of it. So you set up a situation in the U.S. around healthcare where, working or middle class people will feel fucked over and sadly and irrationally, in my opinion, aim their rage downward toward the people that can get help. Well, I'm paying taxes to pay for that person's food stamps or that person's Medicaid, but I can't even fucking get healthy food, or I can't even get my prescription filled. And so you have this, this divide. Now, what would be the solution to that problem, and what would prevent that turning around and hating those below you, would be universal programs that allow every single person, regardless of income or status at your job, to have access to at least the basics of life: housing, healthcare, medicine, food, right? And in a universal program, you would cut out the elements of these convoluted programs that actually pit various lower classes against each other. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and I hope your audience knew it. But that's what I was talking about in that voice of just like, well, unless you're a worthless piece of shit,
exactly.
That's what I meant by that, because that's the kind of the tone it takes on. Like one of the like saddest realities was that when I was working as a case manager, we had terrible health insurance for medical stuff. It was an abomination, dude. We struggled, and there was actually some of the case managers like, this motherfucker can get this stuff, but I'm working. I'm the one helping him, and I don't get it. I mean, it just broods within you.
Yes.
And, and
it's of course not the poor people's fault. It's the system's fault, but it's easier to aim your hatred at the poor people.
And this is totally opinionated, but I think it has a lot of merit in the sense of, like, to universalize like psychoactive mental health medications. Because, like, one of the things I said initially is that people talk about, abuse of the healthcare system. One thing that would make like mental health medications safe from that is nobody wants to take them. Yeah. People aren't going to be like, well, now that I got this thing, I'm going to take Prozac and Effexor and Seroquel. You know what? Throw in a couple of those more antipsychotics, like put it on my bill. Like, no one wants to take these things. Yeah. It's like the idea that there'll be abuse is absurd, as just with medications. It counts. I mean, I don't, how I feel on that anyways, but just with medications, this is a thing that people don't want to abuse, because as we can get into as well, the issue of side effects, like, and also the issue of your idea of autonomy, where people are like, yeah, I don't want to be on this the rest of my life, or like people are I mean, one of the hugest problems in the field of mental health is people stopping taking their medications. Mm-hmm. That's a whole other topic, like, of why. It's like, oh, those idiots. It's like, no. There is a reason. But that idea that, yeah, it's not universal. It's just like you have a product that I would say, again, opinion, but I would say is absolutely, like, abuse-proof. Because it's not a thing that people, unless you start, like, putting in, like, painkillers or stimulants in the field of mental health drugs, it's not going to be abused because it's not like extra dental checkups or like elective surgery or anything. It's stuff people don't want to take.
Exactly. And of course, the reasoning behind the crafting of these policies and this entire system isn't really about concern over whether or not people will abuse those pills, right? The ultimate real reason is, of course, this system and the way things are set up makes a small amount of people incredibly rich who then take those wealth and disproportionately affect the political system to continue their interests, right? The pharmaceutical companies, the insurance lobby, healthcare insurance lobby, right? They keep this system intact because they benefit financially from having this system, as convoluted and bullshit as it is, in place. And it would be a existential threat to their profits if we made things like healthcare and medicine universally accessible to people, and that's why these things quickly result in a critique of, capitalism more broadly. And on this show, of course, we're going to point that out.
Right. And the thing that it gets down to is, and I talked about abuse, and I don't mean like the abuse of the actual drug itself, but I mean people abusing the system of overusing, overusing the medication as a sense of like overusing their healthcare. Like you're gonna have way more pointless hospital stays. And it's just like, no. People don't want to do this stuff. Like, and and people could get into the spat about like maybe they're faking it or whatever, and that's a whole crazier other topic. But just the idea that the medication for mental health isn't universal is just like that is if people use it too much. And the system we have now, so I think I mentioned this on the previous public podcast, was my little issue. I don't know why I'd say little, but I was taking a medication that, and again, you talk about like the disingenuousness of like for people, and it's like they do everything to prove that it's not that, because every mental health practitioner, every person that even just advocates for it or anything like that has this most basic iceberg lettuce amount of ideas about mental health say never, never, never abruptly stop taking your psychiatric medications. And yet there are so many ways in the system where you can be cut off.
Exactly.
It would be DEFCON 9 when I was working with some people because some fucking paperwork thing happened and now they're cut off from their medication. And so what happened to me was
universal access solves that problem as well, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah. But, like, just not being fucking evil solves it, too. But, like, so what happened, I think I told this, so I'll just go over it briefly again, was that I had this medication that I was taking, and I found it to be helpful. I mean, not incredibly helpful, but for me, I had real problems with getting any. I didn't have, a lot of side effects. There wasn't any effectiveness. There was no efficacy of it. I just felt like I was taking nothing. And I had one that seemed like it was helping. And I had been taking it. I had been sober and taking it for almost a year and a half. And then it just stopped. I was like, there's a problem with your insurance. And I'm like, what? No, I didn't change over. I didn't make any adjustments. And then the problem with the insurance is they couldn't get the medication. The medication was just like out. And I was like, what? And they were just like, yeah, we're just waiting on it. I was like, is this a Walgreens thing? Is this if I go to CVS? And they're like, no, it's just out. I'm like, there's not like an SSRI famine. Like, how is this like out? Like, the field workers picking the like Effexor or like on strike? Like, what are you talking about? And it's like it went out. You know how bad it went out? So the drug was called Breht. This is how you know how much they fucked up. They actually created this program through Breht that was subsidized, where you could actually sign up, not through any government stuff. You could sign up to get extremely, extremely subsidized Breht after this happened. Because everybody was just like, once they found out, like every person I saw or I'd heard of it was just like, oh, there is this program that's brought to you by the prescription company. It's not. But that they've been subsidized because they had people that had been using it were cut off, and they were like, well, fuck this then. Because that's what I did too. I was like, I'm not going back to it because I was cut off for almost a month. Jeez. And at that point, I stopped checking on it, and I didn't even know what to do with myself.
Did you go through withdrawals or symptoms of the sudden stop?
Just a sort of, I wouldn't even call it withdrawals. I would just say the effects it was doing it for me weren't continuing, and I found it helpful. Which I'm lucky because, of course, there's like getting off of it. I had that once happen with the medication where it wasn't useful for me, and I thought I tapered pretty well. I was kind of being dumb about it, and it still was like devastating. And, like I felt it in my bones, like this weird way, and I was just like, yeah. So I mean, I guess I'm lucky for that, but. I was already in a fragile state. This was kind of towards the tail end before my relapse after that amount of time. And again, I'm not blaming it on that, but it was certainly a factor. And it was just this pointless bullshit of like, it was just taken off the table. And just there was, it's not a hugely wide used drug, but enough people were using it where that's devastating. You just take this thing off, especially if it's like working.
Was it a supply chain issue during the pandemic? Did you ever get to the bottom of what the fuck caused this?
No, what happened was that, at best to my knowledge, and it was hard to sift through because no one's talking, They just created this program. It's like, all of a sudden, we'll give you this super subsidized. Like, wow, out of the kindness of your own heart, or that you fucked over a ton of people. Yeah. But it was, at least what I heard, that it wasn't getting as widely spread as possible, so they didn't make a lot of it. And then there was a mismatch between how much doctors were actually, so they hadn't made enough. And instead of like, and the issue was is that they could have made more, but they cut back costs because like, well, we don't need to make this much. Right. And their pricing, they were afraid it was going to change, so they just like had stopped, and not like indefinitely, but just during this time period. Sure. I mean, insane. And what you're talking about, these are drugs that are the well-being of people's minds. Yeah. And it's just like, and this is, that is just a personal anecdote, but stuff like that has happened. Stuff like that where some stupid thing occurs with insurance. And now it's...
Yes, that happens all the time.
You have people that are barely scraping by.
Or just like I said earlier, losing your job.
Oh, yeah. Not even that. This is even more, that's awful too, but this even more just technical, made out of thin air bullshit where... this is another thing that I had gone through, but many people as well too, where you're barely scraping by, and it's like, man, this is already like $80 a month. God damn. And then just 2 months later, oh, it's now $100. Why? Fuck you. That's why. Basically, they can tell me, just fuck you. That's why.
Yes. We want to make more money.
It's like, well, you know what? I can handle the $100. What I can't handle is the uncertainty. Because what if next month it's $120? What if next month it's $130? Like, do I need to pull the ripcord now and stop, just now pursue a new one? Not because it's not working, but because financially, like the idea of that, there's like, we don't know, the shoulder shrugging of like how shit will turn out, how the professional psychiatrists, not their fault, but how they talk to you about it, like it should be all right. And it's like, should? Mm-hmm. Like, this is supposed to be something that at least is prescribed for a prolonged amount of time. Mm-hmm. Like, it can just change.
That's the opportunity for profit. Because if pharmaceutical companies have no regulation, nobody that they answer to, which they fucking don't, they control our government, not as opposed to the vice versa. You have a situation in which they can see very clearly, and they have all these equations and fucking people working on these problems all the time to make sure that this is true, that these people need this medication. We have nobody stopping us. We can raise it $20, $30, $50, $100, knowing that people will absolutely go out of their way to pay it, because they need it. Now we can't make it $10,000 because then people will just 90% of our market would dry up. People could just not afford that, so they would just cut it off. So you can't get crazy with it, but you can continue ratcheting up the price, squeezing people for more and more profit on these substances, these pills that people absolutely depend on daily to get by. Insulin is a great example of this. Around the world, governments have checked their pharmaceutical companies. They've bargained with them, or in various other policy moves, made it such that insulin can be affordable to people, knowing that they fucking need it and knowing that corporations driven by the profit motive will do whatever they can to rack up those costs or the prices so they get more money. In the U.S., we don't have that. So you have the situation in which people can't afford their own insulin, which is very cheap to make. It's not even like, well, there's so much that goes into it. Come on, like the overhead cost of just producing one pill is so high, we have to charge this amount. It's not like that at all. It is an obvious example of price gouging and profiteering off of human need and human desperation. That is the evil inherent, not in like bad people, but in a capitalist structure that says if you want to remain CEO of this company, you need to maximize profits for our shareholders. The moment you stop doing that because you get a little misty-eyed about caring about the babies that might die, we'll replace you with somebody that's willing to cut the fucking throat.
They're like, hey, Phil, we're not going to eat the cost of you having a conscience.
Yeah, exactly right.
We can't eat the cost of empathy.
Exactly. We'll cut you loose, bud.
Well, and that's the thing, too. And again, it goes back to the initial thing I had said is that people don't want to take these things. So even in this market, whatever you want to call it, it's not like a product and the best wins. It's bullshit because doctors are prescribing you this.
Right.
Like the whole thing is that, yeah, you kind of nickel and dime and then raise it up little by little. And it's not like, well, it's still the best product in town. It's just like, no, my psychiatrist, this trained professional who has most of the time the right frame of mind is saying you can't stop taking these.
Right.
It's like, and again, you were made to feel a fool of like, so what, you're going to like risk your well-being, your mental well-being because you wouldn't pay $10 more? It's like, no, you don't understand. They've kept doing this. And like, I'm not like, it's that one thing where they can make you feel foolish because of like what this amount of money, like just little, it's going to make you like take a risk of getting on a brand new medication. It's like, you don't understand, dude. Like there's still real life. Things still have functions. Like there's still dollar signs and there's still dots and decimals, and what I can't afford, there's still the green and there's still the red on my bank account. Like this is bullshit. And the worst thing is it's like, well, no one else in the market is making this, or no one has like, been the superior company or capitalism. Like you're not even selling this shit. We are told to take this for good measure by people who mean well. And if we don't, the effects are dire.
And precisely to your point about these offering of products and like the ideal in the way that for the free market is pitched to us is competition is what controls prices. You have a lot of competing firms in an industry. They're going to compete to undercut each other to get more business. But in every major sector of American economy today, you have monopolies. So when you have monopolies in the pharmaceutical industry, which we absolutely fucking do, then they don't have competition that would, in a idealized free market with plenty of competition, reduce those costs through competition. There is no competition, and so they can price gouge all they want. And that's just in the pharmaceutical industry. But if you go to the food industry, you go to manufacturing, you do any other industry in American society, you will see a small group of corporations controlling everything in that market, such that the free market libertarian ideology that they pitch to us that really highlights competition is completely eradicated. That does not exist. There is no competition in these markets. And if you and I wanted to start a business, you think we're going to be able to start a small entrepreneurial business that can go up against Pfizer? No. You think somebody's going to be able to create in their basement a company that's going to go up against Amazon or Walmart? No. They have monopolies. They've cornered the market. They've eliminated all competition, which is actually, unlike the fairy tales we're told about capitalism, an inherent incentive. Because if you're one of these competing firms in a free market, right, you have every incentive in the world to gobble up or put out of business your competition such that you can corner the market and make as much profit as possible. So it's inherent in the logic of capitalism that monopolies over time will absolutely form. And these are some of the consequences we see when those monopolies form in the sector of healthcare and pharmaceuticals. And in a just society, at the very least, we'd have government step in and be the forced competition there, right? Say, no, we're just not going to let you do this to the prices. We're going to make you sell them at this fucking price. But our government is controlled by those corporations such that it doesn't and can't do that, you know? I mean, we got to talk about capitalism on Rev Left.
You know? No, I'm saying I'm going to text my psychiatrist to up the dosage of my antidepressant because, fuck, man, it's that it's the old quote, which is funny because it's been used both against socialism and capitalism, but it's the idea of, well, you want the government to run anything, you want them to do anything, like at least this way it's better. And it's the old quote of like, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet, and it's like, where the fuck's my omelet?
Yeah, I'm just seeing a lot of broken eggs around here.
You're just breaking eggs and like, you're like, it's going to be sunny side up, and you fucked up again and you throw it on the floor and like, they'll clean it up. It's like, where's the omelet? Like, where's this system? Like, you know what? Even the government fucks it up. That is to suggest you aren't. And there's something also, even if there was limited choices, the uncertainty when it comes to, I mean, insulin, Jesus Christ, but the uncertainty as well when it comes to psychoactive medications is just abhorrent. Yeah. It's like the idea that people aren't sure if they're getting this stuff. It's like, you know what? Why not drink and use drugs? Hey, at least the drug dealer's reliable.
Yeah, you're
At
right.
least he's playing a bad game, but he's not rigging it. He'll sell you. You know what? They've upped my Wellbutrin over and over again, but he never upped that dime bag.
And McCormick cost the exact same it did 10 years ago.
Inflation hit that because people were mad at Russia and they actually thought McCormick was made in Russia. No, something like that. It's just idiots throwing out plastic bottles. It's like, dude,
I'm never drinking vodka again.
it's so stupid.
It's so
It's like St. Petersburg vodka, and it's just like you could clearly see "Made in China" on the bottom. It's just like, this is for Ukraine. Like, you fucking morons.
That's hilarious.
It's very sad, actually.
Now, is there anything else you want to talk about side effects here?
Oh, just one important thing too. And again, I talk about this a little bit more for like, when it comes to stigma, where especially like the severely mentally ill people, it's like one of the biggest problems is people stop taking their medication and immediately goes to those idiots. That's stupid. Great. Now we have these roving homeless people and these homeless people committing crime and these, because they stopped taking their medication and, all that type of judgmental crap that goes on. And one thing is that, like, just to put it bluntly, side effects are not anything to sneeze at. Yeah. Because, one that's just heard all over. This is one, like, real sticking point with people that have, like, bipolar 1. They have to work on curbing the mania and sort of the swings. And so a lot of people get into this state of, it's everything's lowered. So like the lows are supposed to raise up a little bit. The highs are come down. Like, so a lot of people talk about the sentiment of missing the manic times and things like that. But it's trying to correct, and there's no like exact science to this stuff. So some people feel like they're just kind of like at a blank slate. And it's like, I guess I don't have any real lows, but I don't feel like I have any highs. And like, that's just the way the medication functions, and so it's some people are unsure, right? Now you start to throw in side effects that, like what I mentioned earlier when you talk about quality of life, you start to talk about things like weight gain. And again, some of these are kind of cast aside as like, well, that's vanity. And it's like, no, it's not. You're talking about people that struggle with self-worth, self-image, and just being healthy, by the way. You start to talk about effects where it like sexual effects of like libido, and not even just libido of like, having sex, but just a natural sort of energy that comes from it. Talk about things of like starting like food tastes funny. I mean, you talk about these things and they're, it's right in the title of it, side effects. And people sometimes, because again, the pill is not going to fix your life. Sometimes it's just a very small like change that you can't even capitalize on sometimes, and it's just supposed to give you the opportunity to do stuff, right? And so they're not choosing a thing that cures my depression, but without these side effects. You're talking about something that you're hopeful is working, it might be working, but then it has this tangible, I know these things it's creating that I don't like very much. I mean, basically the point I'm getting at here is like there's a lot of people that will stop taking stuff because of side effects, and outwardly you could be like, well, that's really stupid. Their depression got worse, or their, and you want to talk about side effects. When you talk about the more severe mental illnesses, the more severe side effects. And not even just like side effects of like really sort of like drastic stuff like immediately suicidal, but a lot of clients that I had worked with were, they were kind of just, as I call it, like just a drowsy volcano. You could tell there was some life in there, but there was nothing coming out, and they were just flat, and they hated being flat. Maybe the delusions and hallucinations went away, but they were flat. And some of them, in their mind, were like, I'd rather deal with that stuff than be this way. Right. And so you have that, and then you throw on stuff of like rapid weight gain, not really having any sort of sexual energy, starting to have bad habits, starting to have like body discomfort, starting to have itchy, these things that come with it. And people would just be like, oh, it's just side effects. It's like, well, it's starting to tear apart quality of life. And again, these things aren't a cure-all. So some people just go, they just do it like a triple beam balance of like, for the amount of effect I think this has for my well-being, to the amount of stuff I know it's causing me, you know what, I'm going to stop taking it. Yeah. And it's just, I basically kind of bring up this point about side effects just so people may have some empathy of like why some people stop taking it. Side effects can be, they can be huge. Like I had stopped taking a medication. Now, granted, I didn't really feel it was working that well. But I was gaining a lot of weight, and I was just like, and I was still exercising, trying to do stuff. And I was like, I don't think I can do this. And I felt internally like, wow, David, you're gaining some weight, so you're going to stop taking this stuff. But in my mind, arguing back and forth like a real sane person, like in my mind, arguing back and forth, I was like, but I don't even think it's that effective anyways. And so it's really difficult. You talk like side effects, again, in the title, side effects, but they can be deal breakers for people taking medication or not.
And I know this has hit you hard as well because on this outline here, it says that some of the side effects of your medication has been a drastic reduction in penis size, and you already didn't have a lot to work with in that realm. So, I mean, you're talking 3 inches down to 1. That could really be a quality of life issue. Am I right?
It's basically an innie at this point. I'm happy as fuck, but it is like, I mean, it's not even at baby carrot status, dude. We're talking like Tic Tac. I'm smiling all the time, but I got Tic Tac dick.
All right, I'm sorry,
we're
guys.
back, baby.
I'm so sorry, everybody, but we're in the Dave zone at the last quarter. In the last quarter of this,
like the reggae air horn. The Dave zone. Holy shit, dude! All right, how do we get back?
Sorry. Let's move on.
Anyway, let's talk about suicide. So, but like, so the side effects, and I wanted to get back to this. You talked about like medication I'm taking. How I'm like, I will say a big part of the medication I'm taking right now, I find beneficial because of its lack of side effects. And I don't think that it totally improves my mood, so to speak, which you'd be like, okay, what does it do? I notice that when I take it regularly that I don't have a lot of the physical effects of depression. So I don't have, I may have depleted energy sort of like mentally, you know, that type of stuff. But the actual like physical energy or just the want to sleep, like there's a difference. Like there's wanting to sleep because you're depressed and you want to do like a little time travel nap. Like fast forward, maybe I'll feel better in 2 hours.
Yeah.
But you're not actually sleepy. There'd be times where I'm depressed. I just want to sleep because I'm sad. And I could actually just fall right asleep because I'm sleepy. You know, I still struggle with things like that, but I don't have the physical effects. Like I can't sleep within a 30-minute time span anywhere I am in the middle of the day. Like, honestly, I was at a point like that. And, you know, I'm not as like lethargic. And, you know, that's truly helpful. It gives me the opportunity to be able to do some things. And again, with my history, like just a lot of stuff has not worked. But there's not that much side effects, and I'm good with that. Yeah. I'm good with my half Mentos pack.
But and that is part of the whole thing of getting into medication as well, is navigating those side effects. Some things aren't worth it. Some things don't. You know, you're constantly kind of readjusting, especially in that first period until you find something that works for you.
That was pretty good.
What?
The stupid penis thing you did.
Okay, you like that? I was trying to move on from that, Dave. I had been planning that for about 10 minutes while you were talking.
Dude, that's funny shit.
Okay, well, anyways, let's. You got to intervene with some jokes once in a while. But kind of coming towards the end of this conversation, maybe we can talk about some healthy coping mechanisms. And I want to say kind of two things up front, which is us saying what has helped us is not saying what will help you, nor is what we're going to say as far as things you can do to kind of put yourself in a better position to deal with some of these issues, a substitute for other things. So I'm not going to say exercise, you don't need medication, right? Sometimes you'll hear people just be like, you just need to exercise, just get out there, just, you know, go to a movie, hang out with some friends, get your mind off things. And people that are really in the shit are like, fuck you.
Absolutely.
Like that is just the weakest shit you could ever tell me right now. And it just shows me that you have nothing of substance to offer me on this front.
And that one thing, that comes from the relativity thing I talked about. That usually comes from people like that where they go, I've been sad before,
yes,
so
exactly.
I get it. So it's just like, no, you don't understand it. I'm at a level of sadness where it's hard to brush my teeth, dude.
Yes,
you're talking about joining CrossFit? Fuck you. Like, again, it comes from those people that go, I know what it's like because I've experienced a micro dose of it, basically.
Right, exactly.
And so that's, usually people that have really been through the shit, they're like, no, I get it. Like,
it comes off as condescending and just completely useless. But on the other side of that issue, and I have somebody who I love very deeply in my life who does this, which is everything about their daily life is structured to make them depressed. Heavy alcohol use, no exercise whatsoever, not a particularly healthy diet, and obviously nothing like meditation or anything like that at all. A hugely sedentary life, poor sleeping habits and sleeping schedule, and they're depressed. And instead of maybe cutting back on drinking or trying to, get some exercise or trying some other natural remedies before you move into medicine, and this is kind of a very American thing as well, is like, give me the shortcut,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'll just take the pill. And then there's like, okay, after several months, I still feel like shit. I'm going to double my dosage. Okay. Well, now I feel a little bit better. But for me, going through what I've gone, and this is somebody who I've talked very openly and honestly with about this, it seems like, you're really stacking the cards against yourself here. You should at least, often maybe in conjunction with medication and therapy, do some other things in life that could help you. Now, all of this is also in the context of those negative downward spirals we talked about earlier, where you can't extract yourself from that downward spiral. And so I'm not, putting anybody down who's in a downward spiral and is relying on medication. But it does seem to me as if it's not rational to think that I can continue drinking heavily, I can continue never exercising, I can continue eating like absolute shit, and when I'm inevitably depressed, I just want to go to the doctor and say, can you give me medicine or triple my dosage so I can feel better again? And so you don't want to kind of fall into either one of those two extremes. And I do feel like there are, and I've learned this through my struggles with these things, there are things you can do that, like medicine, can kind of open up space to begin positive spirals and feedback loops instead of negative ones. And often those are the annoying things to hear, like eat good, have a consistent good sleep schedule, get outside in the sun and exercise once in a while. Even if you don't feel like it, try to go out and be social. Those are little things that will not solve the entirety of the problem, but if you can get yourself motivated enough to start trying to do those things, they can create that, like we said earlier, lift the floor a little bit and give you an opportunity to start positive feedback. So with all of that in mind, with all of those, caveats put up front, what would you say are some healthy coping mechanisms that you've been able to develop that you could, in good faith, recommend, broadly speaking, to other people?
Well, I mean, one thing certainly that has been a game changer of that people have noticed, just a different me in this respect. I've been sober plenty of times, but a real different thing. And honestly, truly, it is about eating. And I don't mean in the sense I really want to break this down in the way that it's been important, and not just in the sense of I became vegan, or I started this all meat diet, or I started doing this thing. It's not about a specific function or a dynamic of eating, like some sort of diet or something. But I realized there was so much of what kept me depressed. You talked about those things that are either barriers or slip and slides that let you slide down. Eating had way more consequence than I was aware of, because when it came to eating, one, you talk about something like weight gain or self-value, or even just your health in general. And me and you have talked about that, where it feels good to be in shape, even if you have some fat on your body, but you don't you just feel in shape. You could be able to walk from a long parking lot. Some things like that feel really good. But I mean, that's even just a small thing. But there's some things towards self-image, right? There's also another thing where eating had such an effect on my mental health, because I would start engaging in binge eating, even during times when I was sober, and not to a crazy amount, but I was still dependent on it, and it made me feel physically sick. It made me feel mentally foggy, sleepy or whatever, and it just even just emotionally, the psychological thing, you've just ate like a glutton, and you feel shameful about it, and you're just you're looking at the Arby's bag, and you're just oh my God, dude, what have I become? You fight monsters, you eat monsters long enough, you become one, dude. But no, and so those things, yes, there's those benefits there, but then also another thing that was helpful about eating was just because it was difficult for me in a large sense of to stop the binge eating, but also to stop the snacking and things like that, because it was so difficult to take it on and to see some benefits of it, and to see it honestly as a sort of fight that I'm winning and I'm making some progress with, and it has all these side things that came with it, and just I could destroy my day with a food coma,
Oh,
and I could destroy my night or my morning, and the effects of just and so my thing is not about some diet to get you into super shape, or some diet that's been proven by some whatever person to help you because of the fish oils in your brain or something.
Yeah.
I just mean in a general sense that you'll feel healthier. You'll feel a little bit more self-worth. You'll feel better. I felt better just when I look at the food I ate, and I sometimes take an inventory of what I ate today. Like there is like, especially it's around like Halloween, everybody has like their things of candy, like hang out in like the buckets and stuff. I'm like, why are you doing this to me?
Yes.
Like, and you know, just
I got 3 kids, so when they bring home the candy, I in good faith, I can't let them.
Well, I pay them to do that.
Okay.
I'm trying to get you fat, so. But there's all these, again, that like all these things that had surrounded it, and it just, again, as we talked about the kind of the chain reaction of positivity, it just from eating, I'm able to do other things, and then even in some cases with eating, like I mean, imagine how you eat on like a first date or something.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully you're not just scarfing down ribs or something. That would actually be a power move. But like you talk about when you're with people and you eat socially, you can engage in conversation. You don't think about food so much. Mm-hmm. And like when you're aware of like how you're eating and just even little things. Honestly, dude, the aesthetic of some food. Looking at like something that you'd get at like Walmart, mm-hmm. Like just a cup of fruit. You're like, I'll have that, and just like this yogurt thing for lunch. And even you're like, man, I want something more. Honestly, the fruit looks pretty. Like like there's a weird thing where it feels like you feel better about doing it. And this is just totally my experience, but
I feel like that's some evolutionary shit.
Well, and my whole point is that there is, I think sometimes you can focus on an area of your life as long as it has like enough significance to it. And it can affect way more things than you thought if you are, if you really go into that. 'Cause some people, it seems so daunting. Like, I need to fix everything. I need to do therapy. I need to do exercise. I need to eat. I need to socialize. I need to, like, all these I's.
Too much. And then you don't do any of it.
Exactly. And sometimes, like, people get help because they really focus on a hobby that is beneficial to them. In one way or another, it produces, like, stimulus. It can produce better habits to be able to do it. It can produce socialization to do it. And all they focused on was this hobby. Yeah. But because it had enough tentacles in all parts of their lives, because they just focused on that one thing, it had tremendous benefit. And it helps all the other things rise with the tide of it.
That's a great point, and that's something I've actually learned in the last few years. There's been several times in my life where I'm trying to like get my shit together, and then you say I need to eat like this, and this is what I need to do to sleep, and I need to exercise, and I need to get 10 minutes of meditation, and then the whole thing falls apart. So over the last several years, I've been like really focusing on one thing, even start with the easy stuff, and make it a habit before you're even trying to deal with anything else. So, for me right now, I'm working on like just building in don't worry about anything else right now. Building in exercise to be a habit in my life. I feel better physically and mentally when I do it. I know that. I know all the benefits that exercise can bring, intellectually. And instead of trying to do that in tandem with a million other things, which then feels too daunting, so you end up doing none of it, just trying to find fun, engaging ways to exercise or just get active, just to move around outside in ways that I find enjoyable. And maybe, for me, I hate going to the gym. I hate running on treadmills. Those things, I feel like a hamster in a fucking wheel. It's not for me. I need to be outside. Recently, one of the things I've found that is a really good way of exercising, just to go to a local park and just shoot hoops by myself for 30 minutes every morning. You get a lot of muscles going. You're constantly jumping. You're shooting the ball from different
lengths. You miss it a lot. So
no, I make it a lot, actually. I'm really good.
Wow.
You run across the court. You do these sprints, then it stops. And it's just, you get your blood flowing, and then if I do that in the morning, the rest of the day is kind of set up better. And it feels, because you get the exercise out of the way. It's not like this thing is, I gotta exercise. It's 2 p.m. I'm still not to it. Get that stuff out in the earlier part of the day, and it can kind of set a new tempo for the rest of the day. And then you can feel better about, maybe being lax on some other areas while you're working on this. Another thing I think that this stuff does, whatever you choose to do, is especially if you have self-esteem issues or these negative thought spirals that happen during depression where you feel like shit and you treat yourself like shit.
Oh, yeah.
Like when you're depressed, you're mean to yourself.
Absolutely.
You kind of slowly build up self-worth and self-respect by sticking to things, by doing things, by bettering yourself. So something as simple as saying, I'm going to respect myself and actually build respect for myself by putting into my body things that are nutritious, right? And then I do that over and over again, and you're actually not just filling a plank of general health and digging yourself out of a hole, but you're cultivating a sense of respect and self-worth for yourself by doing that over and over again, giving my body the nutrients it needs. And I want to double down on what you said about diets. Fuck fad diets. Fuck the Atkins and keto and fucking carnivore diet like Jordan Peterson tried. Ended up in a gutter.
What are you talking about? He's doing great.
Ended up in a gutter in Eastern Europe.
Dude, he's just like, I was eating all meat and now I'll eat all benzos. An all benzo diet, dude. I'm celebrating January, dude. January, bro.
But
it's coming up, dude.
But all this is to say, don't even worry about all that shit, because that can be daunting, and you could it's a whole fucking world in and of itself. And nutritional science is so difficult to wade into. The basic is just eat healthy, nutritious produce food. So like one thing you can easily do is just like go around the edge of a grocery store. I kind of do that. And if you think about the whole edge of a grocery store, like starts with like fruits and veggies, and then it goes to the deli, and like it's in the meat area. You can like healthier foods on that. And that's really what it's about. It's not about being vegan or only eating meat or subscribing to this or that diet. It's just a matter of getting good, nutritious food into your body, which is the foundation by which you have, the rest of your body functions, including your mood and your mental health and those things. But you also don't want to, put too much on your table at once. So just finding one thing that is relatively easy, doing it over and over again until it becomes more or less a habit, and then focusing on something else without overwhelming yourself or without being so fixated on this thing that you're in these insane forums about how you can only eat non-carbs, and you don't want to get into that realm either, because that can become a fixation and an obsession, and honestly it gives rise to eating disorders. When I think it's like there's a word for it, like orthorexia or something, where you just become so fixated and obsessed about getting food that it becomes, such a fixation in your life that it undermines other areas of your life. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I
mean,
mean,
it's simple. Just feed your body nutrition.
And one thing I would add to that is like you said something simple and easy, and I would just say that it's not easy, but it's simple.
Simple.
See, that's one thing that's important, is because I only have to focus on this thing. Like not even doing like exercise with eating or something like that. Yeah. Or I wouldn't say working on sleep, because like that's less participatory, But like you could just work on like exercise. That would be a little bit difficult if you are really binging and stuff. But just one thing that can be difficult to do, but it's the one thing you kind of pinpoint on. Yeah. And it's as long as it's something, and again, this doesn't have to be like just biological stuff related with exercise or food or whatever. It could be like some hobby that you enjoy.
Social interactions.
You try to master at a certain point. And if you hone in, like at least for me, I've honed in on that one thing. It's like I'll just dedicate to this. If I'm going to do one thing, I'm going to do this well. Mm-hmm. I'm just strive. And I may not do it well every day, and I may set back, but it's like, if I just make it one thing, if I have that nice, like, singular approach, where it's just like, all right, I fucked up the rest of my day at work, and I got angry at my kids and all this stuff, but I still have this one thing I can do. That can make it way easier. And one thing that I would say is just really, really, really humbled me, and it's been helpful, is that I used to have this grandiosity about what would fix my like mental health. Not fix, but what would, sort of help it out and remedy it. And, if you would have told me, like, David, it will be you'll have massive improvement from changing your eating habits. I'm like, fuck you, dude. I have like an existential dread, and I have like this stuff, and I've worked on this for years. And
I'm different.
I not only that, but I require different solutions. And it's, what it comes to me, where there's times where I was like really cranky, and then I eat, and I'm not so cranky. And my brain wants to go, no, that was particularly awful. This has nothing to do with the fact that I feel better after I ate. Because you feel silly because it's like this basic thing has made you feel better, and you're like, no, my issues with something are supposed to be more important than that, know. And if you just kind of, like, me just dropping that and being like, people like say, like, what's better for you this time around that's helped you, like, do all these things and really engage all this stuff, and, like, people have noticed this change, I'd be like, eating, a part of me doesn't want to say that, because, like, no, it's supposed to be this, like, master plan I've concocted in my head, and this system that's very, like, psychologically intense, and it's just, like, just the biggest factor, eating. Yeah. I mean, I do so much other stuff, recovery-related, all the other stuff, but it was, But just the idea that it's like, I don't need some grandiose, giant, complex thing to rejuvenate my life.
Absolutely.
Just something very simple. And again, there's something that's comforting in like something simplistic to where it's like, I can just point my scope at that and I don't have to look at the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sleep, I think sleep really is important. And as I've taken that more seriously, I've felt the benefits throughout the rest of my life of a consistent sleep schedule and not sleeping too late. So one thing me and my wife obviously delegate tasks, having 3 fucking kids, like we all kind of pick things that we really focus on doing, or like the shitty thing of like getting up every single morning and taking the kids to school. We could try handing that back and forth, but I actually just said, I want to do that indefinitely. Every morning on the weekday when the kids have school, I'll get up, I'll get them ready, I'll take them to school. Then I'm up, and then it's fucking 8 a.m., and I'm getting early morning sun exposure in my eyes, which actually really is important to set your circadian rhythm to help with that constant sleep schedule. I'm waking up at the same exact time every weekday, and it's in the morning, right? And which makes me go to sleep earlier. So I go to sleep at like 10 and I wake up at like 7, which is good. A lot of people, obviously we know the negative health effects of like people that work night shifts. And how, there's so many things. Your body is just thrown into disarray. Evolutionarily, it was programmed to like rise with the sun. And then once the sun sets, you might huddle around a fire for a few hours and then you go to sleep, right? And so radically changing that will result in negative consequences throughout the rest of your day. And this is doubly true in depression, you don't want to get out of bed. So you'll sleep in. And then when you get out of bed at 3 p.m., you feel like shit, Like, at least me, even when I was like not depressed, just like a teenager that could sleep that long. I can't even do that anymore if I tried. But those years were like I could do that and I didn't have kids and didn't worry about it. But like, you wake up as the sun's going down, like it just feels shitty. You're feeling off, And I feel like much better when I wake up and I see the sun just coming over the horizon. And there's even lots of neuroscience evidence that early light exposure, like not staring at the goddamn sun, but just being outside for 10 to 15 minutes in that early dawn when the sun is still low in the sky does help set and cement your circadian rhythm in a healthy direction. So whether it's diet, whether it's exercise, which has obviously been huge for me, or it's sleep, or even smaller things, one thing and just try to do it. And you will fail. There will be days when you fuck up, you don't eat good, or you take 2 steps back. And also in those moments, have self-compassion. Kind of pat yourself on the back and say, okay, today I fucked up. I wasn't able to keep it on the rails. Tomorrow's a brand new day. I can try again to get it back on the rails without feeling like shit, without spiraling into some inner dialogue about how I'm a worthless piece of shit and I'll never be able to do it, or this perfectionist idea that one time I fuck up and the whole month is screwed for my, my goals. So self-compassion, focusing on simple things, and just kind of building it up from there, I think is a good approach as an underlying basis for a healthy life.
I mean, in self-care, that alone, like, there's things that I just cringe. And I know it's a huge part of me, but like you talk about things like positive affirmations, like people that put like Post-it notes and stuff on there, and I'm just like, I can't ever bring myself to do that. Or I can't say these mantras about myself. It's just like, I don't know. There's this eternal, stern German father figure that's like, give me that fucking Post-it note, you piece of shit. Like, go chop wood, you piece. But like. There is,
which actually might help more,
but yeah, dude, and eating all meat and then taking 400 Benz. Sorry, I'm still on that. So stupid. But the self care, like forgiving yourself in that you're not a piece of shit, because that is, man, when we spin that narrative, that keeps us. You talk about how we like that self-flagellation of our habits, that like where we just like I think, therefore I am. I think I'm a piece of shit, therefore I am. And you're just like, I don't deserve anything better. And part of this was through mindfulness, but like, I mean, this is just one thing I thought of. Like, there's this exercise that if you're trying to like be compassionate to yourself, I mean, it's one that's probably been used like over and over and over again, so it's not very novel or anything like that. But that is just something that helped me recently. Is just like imagining yourself as like a young child. Imagine all the stuff that you have, like in the world, and all the whatever you're going through, relationship troubles, financial troubles, legal troubles, just mental health stuff. You have everything you feel like you need, and it's not enough ever. Just all that stuff, and it's like, well, I've done things wrong, or I've been so selfish, or everybody wants me to get better, but I can't get better, and all this stuff, and I suck, and I hate myself, and like, if, God forbid, if I said anything of the sort that I say to myself, I would go to jail. Like, just such like terrible, like being so awful to myself, and just imagine yourself as you were as like a younger kid, maybe in a sad moment, like maybe after you got bullied, or maybe when you're scared, and it's just like, this is just a younger kid just trying to do his best. He doesn't know any better, and maybe you got made fun of for something stupid you did, or you got like beat up, or you got just something where you lost a game, or you felt like you disappointed people, and you're just like would you lash out as like you as that younger child? He's just doing the best that he can, and he doesn't know how to do any better, and he didn't want to disappoint his parents or his friends, or he didn't want to like not live up to what he was like supposed to be, but he was just trying his best. And like, I'm getting sad just thinking about it, but like, if you could just imagine yourself, that's you too. Yeah. You're the same form of that child, where you're just trying your best, man. Like, when you sit in like depression, or when things get so dark and you feel like you don't deserve it. Absolutely, you don't deserve it. And you just, you can try harder, and you need to, but you didn't want to disappoint people the way that you may have, and you didn't want your life to turn out this way, and you don't deserve it. You don't need to condemn yourself, and that condemning yourself will never make you feel better. I mean, again, not supposed to speak for everybody. I'll speak for myself, but being that sort of bullshit, tough love and harshness on myself has never helped my well-being. I've never been able to use stick rather than carrot to make myself feel better. And I just sometimes, when I fuck up, when I mess up with eating, or when I've like slept in, or when I can't sleep at night, I think these awful things about myself, or I think about the things I missed and the opportunities I lost, and the ways I've disappointed people, the ways I've hurt people. I just try to imagine that, like, that younger me, I was just like, he was just trying his best, and that's what you are. You're just trying his best. You just want to be like a little bit happy. You just want to find some contentment, and it's okay, and you deserve to just try more, just for you. And it's all right if like things have gone awry or you've messed up. You're just doing the best you can, man. And we think of ourselves as like, now that we're grown older, we have all this knowledge and we're smart. I mean, it usually feels like the opposite. Like, the world gets more complex and we don't know anything. And you never lash out, not even at your younger self, but a younger child, for just like messing something up that they were trying to do. That's all we are, man.
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. Beautifully, beautifully said. I could not agree more. If it's hard to find compassion for yourself in your adult version, think of yourself as your child version. And I've even taken that to extreme extents where, when I'm getting harsh on myself in a period of mental health issues, a crisis, whatever, and some things in mindfulness practice certainly help create enough space to be able to do this and cultivate the sort of heart that can do this. But it's like, literally, like, I'll make the motion, like, kind of like as if like I was a little baby and my heart up in my chest, and you kind of rock like this, like, it's a silly thing and nobody's around when I do it, obviously, but it's that like physical act of like cradling my heart technically, but also I genuinely think and visualize like me as a baby, how innocent I am, how screaming and yelling in my face would do nothing but hurt me more. Being harsh with myself, that little, like, that stern German figure, that little Nazi in your head that kicks your own ass, just to like fucking try to push that away, conceptualize yourself as a little child, and conceptualize yourself hugging that little child within you, because a lot of those emotions that we experience as children, we still experience as adults, but we feel less leeway to really give them any credence. Because I'm an adult. I shouldn't be feeling these feelings. I shouldn't be acting like this. I shouldn't be, feeling vulnerable and shit like that. But to really like open up to that part of yourself and to see the innocence within. And then it also really helps as well, once you start showing compassion to yourself, to be able to show compassion to others and vice versa. I think like your ability to really show compassion to others is hindered if you're really cruel and unable to show compassion to yourself. And so even it might seem narcissistic even in a vacuum to think like cradling the little baby within you, but it actually is doing exercises for that heart muscle of love and compassion. And you can start seeing the little child in every other person, It's very hard to hate and to want to brutalize yourself or other people when you take time to visualize them as a little innocent child that we all once were, that we all once were. And in a lot of ways, as smart as we think we are and as grown up as we think we are, we're still that, especially in our worst times.
And for whatever reason, what is the deep fear when you do stuff like this? At least for me, the deep fear is like you're being easy on yourself and you're letting yourself be selfish, or you're letting yourself being narcissistic. And I just try to tell myself, and for everybody else too, when it's like, oh, they're just going easy and they're just babying themselves, or all this stuff, all this woo-woo bullshit self-love stuff. I just think, how often is that the case? Mm-hmm. How often is that the case that you're being too easy on yourself? At least I know in my own experience, I've never been like, it's always harsh shit. It's always this idea of just pointing a finger, screaming at yourself, and it's useless. And you know what? Let's say maybe you are babying yourself. Maybe you are being a, dare I say, snowflake. Maybe you are doing this stuff. That has a better chance of you bettering yourself. Mm-hmm. So you know what? Why not even go the sissy, libtard, snowflake way? Why not do that if it has better odds? Because you know what way doesn't work? Being brutal to yourself. That is a 0% chance of working.
Absolutely correct. And you're being just as narcissistic when you're brutal with yourself.
100%. It's like self-pity when you're
more narcissistic, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, shit. That's a beautiful kind of note to end on in general. But is there anything else that you would want to say? Of course, the little discussion we had about healthy coping mechanisms is just scratching the surface. There's different things for different people. But yeah, anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Can I say 2 things?
God damn it. Should I cut it off right now?
Dude, I have to say, I just want you to know this. I wasn't going to do it, but during the whole part, when I went on that thing, which I truly believed about the child, I wanted to, like, after it was spiraling and going, I just want to be like, you just got to learn that deep down when you look at yourself, you really got to invest in crypto. Just ruin it.
Stop with your fucking crypto jokes.
I know.
For those that only listen to the public feed, this crypto thing is a long-running Patreon joke of his.
Get on the Patreon. But and then one other thing. This is just something. I mean, you can adopt this if you like. I think it's pretty funny. For like morons that never change their opinion or are always stuck in their way. You know what's a good name for them? You should call them horseshoe crabs. Do you know why?
Why?
Because beating every animal out by millennia, the horseshoe crab hasn't evolved for over 445 million years.
Just doing his damn thing.
Dude, he's stuck in his way. I just imagine a little horseshoe crab with like one of those bald spot wigs. He's like, I ain't a waffler. The horseshoe crab, I don't know whether to judge it or give it mad respect that 445 million years hasn't changed a damn thing.